Chapter 178. 3 days later, when the training in the bloodthirsty camp started again, Lin Sun found that this was the real training in the bloodthirsty camp. The remaining 42 trainees would be trained separately one by one. Each trainee would have a special drill master to give one-to-one guidance, and each drill master would carry out special training according to the characteristics of each trainee. In this way, the potential of each trainee was stimulated to the greatest extent. At the same time, more profound and advanced knowledge appeared in the teaching of the theory courses, such as how to practice a fighting skill to the mastery in the shortest time in martial cultivation. Another example was the various tests and dangers that the strong men of Gang Spirit Realm, Sea Spirit Realm, Tao Insight Realm, and Reincarnation Developing Realm had to face on the road of cultivation. Even though it was merely a theory, it contained the experiences and painstaking efforts of countless sages and experts, and it was precious knowledge that couldn't be learned in the outside world. Similarly, this kind of training had never been taught in the bloodthirsty camp before. All these signs showed that the 42 trainees, including Lin Sun, had passed many tests and obtained the final approval of the bloodthirsty camp. And the trainees who stayed in the end would enjoy the real inheritance and cultivation of the bloodthirsty camp. As the first in the war zone assessment, Lin Sun had the absolute priority in choosing the drill master. When many people speculated that he would choose Shu Sanqi as the drill master, Lin Sun unexpectedly chose Young Ku. Perhaps Shu Sanqi, as the chief drill master, had incredible power, but for Lin Sun, Shu Sanqi was not the most suitable candidate. Only Young Ku knew how Lin Sun grew step by step from the 6th level of the martial realm to the present, and only Young Ku was familiar with and understood everything about Lin Sun. Lin Sun believed that only the drill master who understood him could carry out targeted training according to his strengths and weaknesses, so as to further promote his progress. Young Ku didn't comment on Lin Sun's choice, but Young Man gave her heartfelt appreciation for it. From this day on, Lin Sun began a new training under the guidance of Drill Master Young Ku. Different from the previous training, it was not easy at all. On the contrary, it was crueler and harsher than before. Young Ku was never a merciful drill master. She would make the most perfect and extreme training plan according to Lin Sun's limits and carry it out consistently. Under this extreme training, Lin Sun would be completely drained like a dead fish at the end of every day's training. His body was on the verge of collapse, but it wouldn't hurt himself. The only good news was that the supply of spiritual medicine in the bloodthirsty camp was no longer limited, so that every trainee could recover in the shortest time and continue the daily training. As time went by, Lin Sun gradually fell in love with this cruel, boring, and simple training. His spiritual power cultivation, physical strength, soul power, martial arts cultivation, everything was gradually improving. Different from other trainees, Lin Sun had just reached the real martial realm more than a month ago, so he had a stronger and broader room for improvement. With the continuous change of Lin's overall strength, Young Ku would also make subtle adjustments to her training plan, so as to tap Lin's potential to the greatest extent. Because Young Ku knew that cultivation was like defying nature. If one wanted to climb the peak, he had to lay a solid foundation before he climbed the peak. The martial realm was the foundation stage of cultivation. If one didn't hone his cultivation foundation to the extreme in this realm, it would be too late to foundation after he reached the Gang Spirit Realm. Time flowed by silently like flowing water. 1 month later, in a secret room, Lin Sun took a deep breath and mobilized all the spiritual energy in his body, which was boiling like raging waves. With a dazzling cyan luster on his fist, he punched the spirit testing stone in front of him. Buzz! The spiritual light on the surface of the spirit testing stone surged like waves. A bright light could be clearly seen, rushing straight up and passing one scale after another. Each scale represented the spiritual energy of a martial realm practitioner in the martial practice hall of Donglin Town. When he was in the martial practice hall of Donglin Town, Lin Sun, who was at the 6th level of the martial realm, had a test. At that time, he had the strength of 4,900 Jun with his spiritual energy. This also meant that Lin Sun could compete with a practitioner at the peak of the 8th level of the martial realm in terms of the spiritual energy. Now, Lin Sun had the cultivation of the 9th level of the martial realm. Besides, he had experienced more than half a year's cruel training in the bloodthirsty camp, and with the help of the nature insight and spirit devour scripture, his spiritual energy was much more abundant than before. Soon, the light on the surface of the spirit testing stone easily passed the 8,000 June mark. Young Ku, who was next to Lin Sun, had no reaction when she saw this. Generally speaking, only practitioners at the peak of the 9th level of the martial realm could have the spiritual energy of 8,000 June. But this standard was like a child's play for the trainees of the bloodthirsty camp, which was not worth paying attention to at all. However, when she saw that the ray of light didn't show any signs of weakening when it reached the 9,000 June position and instead kept rushing upwards, Young Ku became slightly more serious. 9,000 June. This was the standard of the spiritual energy that an excellent trainee of the bloodthirsty camp could have. Young Ku was sure that every one of the 42 trainees who were currently training in the bloodthirsty camp could reach this level. But if she wanted to distinguish who was better among the 42 trainees, it depended on what their specific test results could reach after the 9,000 June mark. 9,100 June, 9,300 June, 9,500 June. As the light kept rising on the surface of the spirit testing stone, Young Ku's look became more and more serious, even with a hint of seriousness. Until the light broke through 9,800 June, the rising speed finally slowed down, but Young Ku didn't look relaxed at all. Her eyes were fixed on the surface of the spirit testing stone, as if she was expecting something. This spirit testing stone was refined by the Academy of Spiritual Implements of the Empire. It was accurate and stable, which was incomparable to the common goods on the market. There were 9,999 scales on the spirit testing stone, representing the limit of strength that could be achieved in the 9th level of the true martial realm. Generally speaking, if it was used to test ordinary practitioners of the martial realm, it was rarely used after the scale of 8,000 June. But at this moment, Young Ku suddenly found that the scale on the spirit testing stone seemed to be insufficient. Young Ku was convinced that the spirit testing stone was not enough for a freak like Lin Sun when she saw that the light finally collapsed when it reached the scale of 9,999. At the thought that the spiritual energy of Lin Sun had obviously exceeded the level of 10,000 June, Young Ku couldn't help but feel a ripple in her calm mind. 10,000 June. This was a natural moat. Among the countless practitioners of the martial realm in the Empire since ancient times, it was absolutely rare for them to break through this moat. Even some ordinary practitioners of the gang spirit realm couldn't have such strong spiritual energy. Drillmaster Young Ku, Lin Sun had also been paying attention to it. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but feel a little surprised and scratched his head. No need to test it. Young Ku suddenly came to her senses and turned away with Lin Sun. That night, Young Ku found Shu Sanqi and said, "The spiritual energy of Lin Sun has also exceeded 10,000 June." Shu Sanqi was stunned and nodded. Yes, it's not surprising that he can achieve this according to his performance in the Demon Cloud Ridge. So far, among the 42 trainees of the bloodthirsty camp, it was known that 7 or 8 people had successfully achieved this step. So Shu Sanqi was really not surprised. But Lin Sun is different from others. His strength showed a sign of slowing down when it broke through 9,800 June. According to my estimation, his final result is not as simple as breaking through 10,000 June. As soon as Young Ku spoke these words, it caused Shu Sanqi's eyes to narrow, and a wisp of seriousness appeared on his cold face that was hard like a rock. "Then what's your estimate?" "I can't tell," Young Ku said, "unless we change the spirit testing stone and test it again." Shu Sanqi immediately felt helpless. It's impossible. The spirit testing stone in the bloodthirsty camp is aimed at practitioners in the martial realm. The spirit testing stone with more than 10,000 June is specially used to test practitioners in the gang spirit realm. We have no such preparation at all. Speaking of this, he couldn't help sighing with emotion. Who can imagine that the so-called standard of the empire is not suitable for these young people at all? This is tantamount to breaking the previous record and creating a new height. Young Ku corrected him. Among the practitioners in the martial realm and the world, not only the trainees of the bloodthirsty camp can achieve this step. Shu Sanchi said, "Have you ever seen someone as special as Lin Sun? As far as I know, he hasn't reached the mastery of the 9th level of the martial realm. Has he?" Young Ku completely understood what Lin Sun said. Indeed, Lin Sun's cultivation had not reached the mastery, but he already had such strong spiritual energy. If he reached the mastery, how strong would his spiritual energy be? Remember, everything about him should be kept secret. Too strong will be humiliated, and too wise will be hurt. I don't want him to be targeted by those big shots of the empire. After thinking for a while, Shu Sanchi made a decision. Young Ku agreed and suddenly asked, "Chief Shu, is it worth it? You should know that helping trainees hide secrets is tantamount to violating the will of the empire." Shu Sanchi narrowed his eyes and kept silent for a long time. Then he said, "I obey the will of the empire, not the will of those big shots. Young Ku, you should understand the difference between the two. But if you do this, once you're found out, it will only be bad for you," Young Ku said seriously. Shu Sanchi snorted. "I'm helping the empire train the real talents, not helping those big shots train obedient dogs. If they blame me, I can just close the bloodthirsty camp again like last time." A smile appeared at the corner of Young Ku's mouth. This was the Shu Sanchi she knew. Just for Lin Sun, Young Ku asked the last question. Chapter 179. Hearing this, Shu Sanchi asked in reply, "How many trainees in the camp do you think need our help to cover up their secrets?" Young Ku understood after thinking for a while. Among the 42 trainees in the camp at present, except for a few people such as Lin Sun and Li Duxing, the others all had strong backgrounds and didn't need their help at all. Shu Sanchi said, "Lin Sun is different. He is the most special trainee in this year's bloodthirsty camp. He not only has unimaginable potential, but more importantly, his mastery of spiritual tattoos is too incredible. Both the transformation of Ziying battleship and the refining of Meteor's crossbow can be regarded as first-class weapons in the world. If such a person is used by the big shots of the empire, it's hard to say whether it's a blessing or a curse." These words showed that Shu Sanchi didn't trust those big shots of the empire and was even full of conflict with them. Lin Sun didn't know that some of the special things he showed had already aroused Shu Sanchi's great attention and even made a certain degree of protection for him. As for whether this kind of protection was good or bad, it could only be seen later. The training went on every day. When Lin Sun reached the mastery of the 9th level of martial realm and lit up the 8th soul star in his sea of consciousness, there were only 3 days left before the 1-year training period of the bloodthirsty camp. At the end of the day's training, Young Ku suddenly said, "Tomorrow will be the last round of assessment. The 30 trainees who pass the assessment will enter the gang-producing field for cultivation." Lin Sun was stunned and suddenly realized that he had been in the bloodthirsty camp for nearly a year unconsciously. That night, in Old Mo's warehouse, when Lin Sun was eating, he keenly noticed that Young Man was a little absent-minded. He couldn't help asking, "Sister Young Man, you seem to be in a bad mood." Young Man sighed faintly. "Don't worry about me. You should prepare for tomorrow's assessment. There are only 3 days left. If you're eliminated at this time, it's not worth it." Lin Sun answered and ate silently. Young Man felt the atmosphere was a little dull and couldn't help asking, "Chirps hasn't woken up yet?" Lin Sun nodded. Since the little guy swallowed the black animal tooth, it had been living in his palm, sleeping and not waking up. "It seems that the black beast tooth is indeed an incredible treasure," Young Man said thoughtfully. Lin Sun stared at Young Man and said, "Sister Young Man, although I may leave the bloodthirsty camp soon, you must tell me if you have any trouble." His tone was calm and serious. Young Man was stunned. After a long while, she sneered, "You want to help me solve my problem?" But Lin Sun didn't seem to be discouraged. He looked more and more serious. "But at least I will try my best without frowning." Young Man nodded and walked out of the warehouse. Rest well. If you're eliminated in tomorrow's test, I won't acknowledge you as my brother anymore." Watching young man leave, Lin Sun finally shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Lin Sun didn't notice that when young man turned around and left the warehouse, her eyes were filled with tears. She walked alone in the night. A light breeze blew her soft and smooth long hair, bringing with it a trace of coldness. This little bastard is really good at sensationalizing. He's so bad. When he leaves the bloodthirsty camp, I don't know how many girls will be cheated by him. Young man whispered. Because of Lin Sun's words, she was overwhelmed with emotions and couldn't control them. She hadn't experienced such a feeling for many years. Suddenly, Shu Sanchi's voice, as hard as a sword, came from the night. "The training of this session is coming to an end. Do you really not want to separate from the bloodthirsty camp?" Young man stiffened all over, and the tears in her beautiful eyes evaporated instantly. She said pitifully, "What? Chief Shu, are you going to drive me away?" Shu Sanchi's thin figure appeared, glanced at young man, and said, "I'm not kidding. The points you won in the last bet are enough for you to completely separate from the bloodthirsty camp, and you don't need to shoulder the responsibility entrusted by the Empire. This is your only chance. Think about it." "There's no need to think about it," young man said without hesitation. "I choose to stay in the bloodthirsty camp. As for the place, just give it to young Ko." Shu Sanchi's blade-like eyes suddenly narrowed, and he said in a low voice, "You should know that if young Ko leaves, she will go to the Forbidden City to solve the grievances of those years. Are you mentally prepared?" A trace of sadness appeared on young man's beautiful face. After a while, she gritted her teeth and said, "I've done wrong in those years, and I don't want this kind of wrong thing to continue." Shu Sanchi stared at young man for a long time, and finally nodded. "The road is chosen by yourself. I hope you won't regret it." After that, he turned around and left. Young man sat alone in the darkness of the night and looked at the distant night sky. Suddenly, a sense of relief welled up in her heart. After so many years, it was time to let it go. The next morning, 42 trainees, including Lin Sun, were gathered together and led by Shu Sanchi to a huge field. This field was very special. The ground was paved with pitch black and smooth rocks, and the surface was branded with mysterious spiritual tattoos. In the sunshine, wisps of dreamy luster rose. In the center of the field stood 30 stone pillars. Every single stone pillar was 9 meters tall and completely pitch black. They just happened to be enormous swords that pierced into the sky. Standing in the field, the trainees only felt an indescribable solemnity coming to their faces, which made them all shocked and dare not make any noise. These 30 stone pillars represent 30 passageways into the gang-producing lake. Shu Sanchi's first sentence attracted the attention of all trainees present. When they looked at the stone pillars again, there was a touch of enthusiasm in their eyes. Wasn't the ultimate purpose of their training in the bloodthirsty camp to enter the gang-producing lake? Now, the opportunity was in front of them. This assessment is also the last one in the bloodthirsty camp. The assessment method is very simple. You need to grab these 30 stone pillars. Those trainees who fail to grab a stone pillar can choose to challenge any trainee who grabs a stone pillar. The time is 1 hour. When the time is up, the trainees who still fail to grab a stone pillar will be eliminated. Shu Sanchi quickly introduced the rules of the assessment. Remember, you can't fight as a group. You can only challenge 1-to-1. Except for combat weapons, all auxiliary weapons, such as crossbows and poisonous fog, are not allowed. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the field became tense. There were 42 trainees in the field, but there were only 30 stone pillars, which meant that 12 trainees were destined to be eliminated in this assessment. Now there were only 3 days left before the training of the bloodthirsty camp. Who would be willing to be eliminated at the last moment? No one. Lin Sun couldn't help but feel a little surprised when he heard the simple rules of the assessment. It seemed simple to compete for the ownership of 30 stone pillars in 1 hour, but it was actually extremely dangerous when he thought about it carefully. If a trainee occupied a stone pillar, but was challenged by others and the stone pillar was taken away, it would be difficult for the loser to turn the situation around. But at the same time, The winner would face a crisis because he had fought once and his physical strength was bound to be consumed. For those trainees who hadn't grabbed a stone pillar, the winner would become the best target for competition. In this way, in this assessment, the competition was not only about fighting power, but also about physical consumption. Now the assessment begins. Shu Sanchi said in a low voice. Whoosh, whoosh. Before his voice died away, the trainees who had been waiting for a long time rushed to the 30 stone pillars in the center of the field like arrows leaving the bow. The scene was chaotic for a while. Everyone exerted all their strength, wanting to occupy a stone pillar as soon as possible. Boom! As soon as a trainee stepped on the stone pillar, before he had time to be happy, someone next to him rushed to him and forced him to step back from the pillar with a palm. Soon, scenes like this began to happen one after another. Lin Sun was also among them. He was even the first batch of trainees who rushed to a stone pillar, but there were 3 trainees competing with him. The battle inevitably broke out. As soon as he stepped on the stone pillar, a sturdy teenager shouted, "Get down!" With a voice, the sturdy teenager had punched Lin Sun. Lin Sun waved his sleeve and hit the sturdy teenager with a casual blow. The teenager fell to the ground and screamed in pain. Seeing this, the other 2 trainees immediately showed fear on their faces. They glared at Lin Sun and turned to choose other targets. Standing on the stone pillar, Lin Sun glanced around and immediately found an interesting scene. Bai Zhao, Li Duxing, and Zhang Sunheng had already occupied a stone pillar, but no one went to challenge them at all. Obviously, everyone knew that it was no different from hitting a stone with an egg if they tried to snatch the stone pillars of Bai and others. Similarly, Lin Sun also found that many trainees who didn't grab a stone pillar also showed a hint of hesitation when they glanced at him and finally didn't dare to come. This made Lin Sun realize that he had a certain prestige in the bloodthirsty camp now, so other trainees dared not to offend him. The chaos didn't last long and then calmed down. 30 trainees occupied a stone pillar respectively, and the remaining 12 trainees also became vigilant. They didn't act rashly anymore, but observed and chose the most suitable target. To Lin Sun's surprise, Ning Ming didn't grab a stone pillar. At this moment, he was carefully choosing his opponent with his eyes wide open. When Lin Sun noticed the burning fighting desire in Ning's eyes and the excitement on his face, he was speechless and completely understood that Ning Ming did it on purpose. The reason why he did so was to find a chance to fight fiercely. This assessment seems to be a little too easy. In the distance, some drill masters whispered. They felt that the assessment was a little calm and there was nothing to see. It's just the beginning. The real show is about to begin, Shu Sanchi said indifferently. Chapter 180. The atmosphere on the site was tense and hostile. The 12 trainees who didn't get the stone pillars were choosing their targets cautiously. Those trainees who got the stone pillars didn't dare to be careless either. All of them were ready to fight against a formidable enemy. On the site, only Lin Sun, Bai Lingshi, Zhao Yin, Zhang Sunheng, and Li Duxing seemed to be the calmest. They were the most outstanding group of people in the camp, and they had long established their great reputation in this year of training. As long as they were not stupid, no one would be willing to compete with them for the stone pillars. Perhaps because of this situation, Bai Lingshi felt a little bored. At this moment, she sat cross-legged on the stone pillar and closed her eyes to meditate. This was not ignorance or arrogance, but absolute confidence in her own strength. This scene made many trainees envious and admire her. The dull atmosphere was soon broken. Ning Ming seemed to have chosen his target. He pointed to a teenager on a stone pillar in the distance and said, "Zhang Sunheng, I haven't found a chance for a whole year. This time you can't escape." As soon as these words came out, the whole site was in an uproar. No one had expected that Ning Ming would direct the spearhead to Zhang Sunheng as soon as he made a move. This was too fierce. Who was Zhang Sunheng? He could stand shoulder to shoulder with people like Bai Lingshi, Zhao Yin, and Li Duxing. How could he be shaken by others? Most importantly, this was the last assessment, which was related to whether the trainees could enter the gang-producing lake for cultivation or not. Under such circumstances, Ning Ming was going to fight Zhang Sun Hung, which was beyond everyone's expectation. In the distance, Sure Yu couldn't help but curse. This idiot is making a mistake again. No matter how big the hatred is, it's not too late to solve it later. Lin Sun frowned. He suddenly remembered that when he first entered the bloodthirsty camp, Sure Yu had joked that Zhang Sun Hung, Ning Ming's sworn enemy, also came. At that time, Lin Sun didn't care much about it. He thought it was just a kind of competition between young people. Unexpectedly, in the last assessment, Ning Ming suddenly broke out. All this seemed to prove that the contradiction between Ning Ming and Zhang Sun Hung was absolutely not simple. The uproar around didn't seem to affect Ning Ming. At this moment, his majestic body stood upright and his eyes were like lightning, heroic and disdainful. This made everyone realize that Ning Ming was not joking. He was serious. Finally, Zhang Sun Hung said, "I've been waiting for this day for a long time, but I didn't expect you to be so eager to determine the winner in this assessment." His voice carried a trace of a unique sharpness, like the edge of a blade cutting on metal, making people uncomfortable. He had a handsome appearance, and he was like a graceful and beautiful young man. However, the space between his brows was filled with a wisp of overbearing arrogance, and it caused his bearing to be slightly overbearing. This was Zhang Sun Hung. His grandfather was the empire's General Zhang Sun Xiong, a top expert whose name shook the empire. Because of his illustrious military achievements, he had made great contributions to the empire and was known as the empire's pillar. As the grandson of Zhang Sun Xiong, it could be imagined how prominent Zhang Sun Hang's identity and status were. Although in the bloodthirsty camp, identity and status were not important at all, and everything depended on strength, Zhang Sun Hung was not just a simple playboy. On the contrary, his fighting capacity was so strong that no one could find fault with him. Eager? Nonsense. I just don't intend to let you enter the gang-producing lake. Ning Ming laughed, stepped on the ground, and rose to the sky. With wisps of terrible and dazzling lightning surging all over his body, he waved the halberd and chopped down at Zhang Sun Hung. He directly attacked Zhang Sun Hung. Boom! The halberd was like a dragon, wrapped in lightning, crushing the air with terrifying momentum. All this showed that Ning Ming was absolutely not joking. Zhang Sun Hang's face darkened slightly. With a swish, a long sword appeared in his palm and fingers, and a horrible, fierce spirit suddenly burst out of his body. It was like a bloodthirsty sword was ferociously unsheathed at this moment. In the blink of an eye, the two of them were locked in battle. One of them moved like a bolt of lightning, and he revealed an arrogant and overbearing bearing of superiority. The other one's sword light was like lightning, sharp and fierce. The confrontation between the two young overmatches immediately attracted the attention of all the people present. Even Shu Sanqi and other drill masters in the distance cast their eyes over. Both Ning Ming and Zhang Sun Hung were outstanding figures in the camp. No matter who won, it would be a loss for the bloodthirsty camp. But it was obvious that this battle was irreversible. Rumble, the strong wind raged in the void, and the terrible spiritual light danced like a turbulent flow, producing a rolling roar. Many people were secretly surprised when they saw that Ning Ming and Zhang Sun Hung were evenly matched in the battle and did not fall into a disadvantageous position. Some people were also thoughtful. Zhang Sun Hung was the grandson of Zhang Sun Xiong, the general of the empire, and he had a distinguished background. But Ning Ming was not inferior either. His grandfather was Blood King Ning Buge, who guarded the western border of the empire for hundreds of years and killed countless enemies. He was just like an iron-blooded god of war. Both of them had military backgrounds, but at this moment they met as if they were enemies. Many people vaguely guessed that the meaning of this battle was not simple, and it might involve some contradictions between the two major military forces of the empire. Boom! Suddenly, Ning Ming was shaken and staggered in the air, which made many people exclaim. Was the winner going to be decided? Lin Sun was nervous and frowned. He had been paying attention to this battle. There was no doubt that Zhang Sun Hang's fighting capacity was strong, and the fighting method he used was also first class, which was extraordinary. Compared with Zhang Sun Hung, Ning Meng was not inferior. But Lin Sun knew that if Ning Meng could not gain the upper hand, he would fall into a disadvantageous situation. But Lin Sun still did not expect that Ning Meng would show an obvious decline at this moment, which made Lin Sun a little worried about him. Your cultivation of thunder power from all directions is not good enough, and it is far from enough to defeat my Golden Sun Spirit piercing method. Zhang Sun Hung sneered, and his clothes were fluttering in the wind. He was full of arrogance. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. As he spoke, he chopped his long sword more than 10 times in a row. Streaks of golden light shot into the sky, cutting the air, which was extremely terrifying. Ning Meng was forced to stagger and dodge, and was even almost hit by his sword. The sword narrowly scratched his cheek, leaving a bleeding wound. Ho-ho, is that all you can do? To tell you the truth, I didn't come to the bloodthirsty camp for the game-producing lake, but to defeat you, a coward. Zhang Sun Hung sneered again and again. If your father didn't secretly send you to the bloodthirsty camp, I wouldn't have a chance to defeat you. All the people in the field were shocked. They never thought that there was such a great hatred between the two teenagers from the military. Just what kind of secrets were hidden within? Being continuously humiliated, Ning Meng's face was livid, and his eyes were full of burning anger. But in the face of Zhang Sun Heng's attack, he had no strength to fight back. Get out! A coward like you doesn't deserve to be the grandson of the Iron Blood King at all. With a loud shout, Zhang Sun Hung pressed forward step by step, and a long sword in his hand made a harsh roar. He chopped at Ning Meng with a destructive posture. This sword seemed to be unstoppable, full of great power, which made people desperate. At this moment, Lin Sun and Shi Yu both changed their faces. In the distance, Shu Sanqi and other drill masters narrowed their eyes slightly, and had secretly prepared to save Ning Meng. Even if Ning Meng was defeated, he must not be killed in the bloodthirsty camp. Bai Lingshi, who was meditating with her eyes closed, also seemed to be shocked at this moment. She opened her eyes and looked at the sword of Zhang Sun Heng from a distance. This sword was called Golden Sun Burns the World. It was a unique skill that was only mastered by the Zhang Sun clan. But at this critical moment, Ning Meng's lips curled up into a cold smile, and his dodging body suddenly stretched out. Boom! Thousands of thunderbolts burst out of his body, and suddenly turned into a round thunder ring in the void in front of him. The thunder ring was surrounded by lightning, dazzling and releasing a terrible killing intent that could destroy the world, which changed the color of the world. Thunder ring. Shu Sanqi was shocked, and his stone-like face finally showed a trace of emotion. Besides Shu Sanqi, the others didn't even have the time to react before they heard a world-shaking collision. It was like two volcanoes had collided together, and the terrifying rumbling shook the heavens and the earth to the point of wailing. Many students even felt their vital energy and blood roil, and their hearts were filled with terror. When they looked at the field again, they saw Zhang Sun Hung screaming and suddenly falling from the stone pillar to the ground. His hair was disheveled, and his clothes were torn, revealing his scorched skin. Streaks of blood flowed from his body and dyed the ground red. Thunder Ring, you have succeeded in practicing this secret method with the power of martial realm. Zhang Sun Heng's face was full of resentment and unwillingness. He struggled to get up, but with a plop, he fell to the ground again. He didn't even have the strength to get up. The whole field was shocked and silent. Everyone was shocked. They couldn't imagine how Ning Meng, who was about to be defeated, suddenly reversed the situation and suppressed Zhang Sun Hung at this moment. This was simply unimaginable. Lin Sun and Shi Yu had the same expression at the moment. They looked at Ning Meng, who was standing on the stone pillar at this moment, and knew that this guy deliberately showed weakness just now in order to seize this opportunity to defeat Zhang Sun Hung in one fell swoop. Who said that this seemingly reckless and honest guy was heartless. Looking at Ning Meng's behavior at the moment, they knew that he was a scheming man. Thunder Ring, it seems that he's been holding back. Maybe he is waiting for this moment. Finally, There's a decent person among the descendants of Blood King named Bugue. Bai Lingshi's starry eyes showed a touch of thinking. In this silent and shocked atmosphere, Ning Meng, who was originally standing on the stone pillar with the posture of a winner, undoubtedly became the focus of the whole field at this moment. Many people realized that the teenager who could defeat Zhang Sunheng was not as simple as he had shown before. But an unexpected scene appeared. Ning Meng, who had been standing, staggered and fell on the stone pillar, as if his physical strength was not enough. He looked embarrassed and cursed angrily. Damn it, the image I've just built is ruined. Chapter 181. Zhang Sunheng's defeat and Ning Meng's embarrassing look didn't arouse much ridicule. On the contrary, when they saw Ning Meng fall on the top of the stone pillar due to physical exhaustion, those trainees who didn't get a stone pillar were eager to have a try. Their eyes lit up. It was absolutely the best time to fight for a stone pillar at this time. Not only did they see this, but Lin Sun and other trainees who had already occupied the stone pillars also saw this. In short, after a fierce battle, Ning Meng successfully occupied a stone pillar at this moment, but his situation became more dangerous than before. This was the rule of the assessment. Before the end of an hour, any trainee could continue to challenge and grab stone pillars. It was this scene that reflected how dangerous this seemingly simple rule actually was. Just when some trainees were ready to take action, Ning Meng suddenly shouted, "Lin Sun, I can't make it. As a friend, of course you won't bear to see me being kicked out. In this case, I'll leave the next thing to you." Everyone was stunned. Was he going to ask for help? Even Lin Sun couldn't help but be stunned. When did this guy become so shameless? Before Lin Sun said anything, he was interrupted by Ning Meng. "It's decided. With your fighting capacity, you can grab a stone pillar at any time, can't you?" Many trainees who didn't get a stone pillar became a little surprised and doubtful. If this really happened, they would first face the threat from Lin Sun if they wanted to grab Ning Meng's stone pillar. Who was Lin Sun? He was the first in the quarterly assessment and war zone assessment. Maybe some people dared to look down on him before, but who dare to do so now? "But I'm afraid I can't take care of you alone. You should know what to do if two people challenge you and me at the same time." Lin Sun sighed. He didn't care what others would think of him after he agreed to Ning Meng's request. After all, only Ning Meng and Sure You could be regarded as his friends in the whole bloodthirsty camp. Since they were friends, how could he ignore them? What's more, this kind of help didn't break the rules. Even if he was criticized, it was nothing at all. Compared with personal reputation, it was insignificant in front of friends. But Lin Sun had to worry that there would be other unexpected situations. "Don't worry. Don't you still have a toy boy?" Ning Meng smiled proudly, as if he had already considered this situation. "Idiot, you actually schemed against me?" Sure You was furious. If Ning Meng humbled himself and asked for help, Sure You would certainly agree. However, Ning Meng behaved as if he was going to win, which made Sure You very annoyed. "Hey, what do you mean by scheming? When your friend is in trouble, are you going to just stand by and watch?" Ning Meng asked. Sure Yu's expression fluctuated. He asked himself honestly, and it was indeed very difficult for him to do such a thing. What if 3 people move out together and challenge the 3 of us separately? Lin Sun asked with a frown. "It's simple. At most, I'll take the initiative to jump off the stone pillar, and then you guys can help me snatch it back. As for the stone pillar that you vacated, if anyone dares to snatch it, you guys can also snatch it back." Ning Meng spoke with fervor and assurance, as if he had the pearl of wisdom in his hands. But when the other students heard the conversation between them, they couldn't help but curse them for being shameless. Since when could such a shameless thing, like forming a gang, be said so boldly and confidently? How shameless! But what made other students helpless was that Ning Meng's arrangement did not violate the rules of the assessment, so they could only curse him in their hearts. At this moment, Lin Sun and Sure You finally understood that Ning Meng had obviously schemed against them. Otherwise, with his courage, he would not dare to take such a big risk to fight against Zhang Sunheng. In the future, they must not be deceived by this guy's rough and reckless appearance. This was the unanimous thought of Lin Sun and Sure You at the moment. However, The three of them obviously aroused the dissatisfaction of other students, who glanced at them with contempt, disdain, or indifference, and regarded them as shameless people. But helplessly, Lin Sun ensured you could only accept it. After all, they made friends with Ning Meng, the most shameless and shameless person. Ridiculous. In the distance, an instructor frowned and was not happy about it. Assessment is assessment. How can they do such a shortcut? Many instructors echoed. If they all act so recklessly, what's the meaning of this assessment? In this regard, Shu Sanqi waved his hand expressionlessly and said, as long as they don't violate the rules, let them do whatever they want. Learning to recognize and use the rules is also a knowledge that they must master. All the instructors suddenly became silent. Although they were still a little uncomfortable, they had to admit that Shu Sanqi's words were indeed irrefutable. Rules were dead, while people were alive. Living in the present world, if one only followed the rules and didn't know how to be flexible, he would be bound by the rules and produce many disadvantages, which would affect his cultivation. After hearing Ning Meng's shameless arrangement, those trainees who didn't get the stone pillars had given up the idea of fighting with Ning Meng. But all this was not over. When Ning Meng was about to breathe a sigh of relief, suddenly someone said in a loud voice, "You three, what you did is a little too much." It was Zhao Yin who spoke. At this moment, he stood with his hands clasped behind his back, and his graceful and handsome face was full of the color of justice. All the trainees were refreshed. A good show was coming. Ning Meng frowned. "It seems that we don't need your advice on what to do we? Indeed, what you didn't violate the rules of the assessment." Zhao Yin nodded, but soon he changed the topic. "But some things are not only about the rules. Since you are so unscrupulous, I can only give you a taste of your own medicine." Under the surprised gaze of all the trainees, Zhao Yin floated away from the stone pillar where he was and landed on the ground. He glanced around and finally fixed his eyes on Lin Sun. "Among the three of you, you are the strongest. Do you dare to accept my challenge?" His words were sonorous and powerful, which made many trainees couldn't help but applaud. Ning Meng's face darkened. He didn't expect that Zhao Yin would come out at this time and directly point his spear at Lin Sun. This was tantamount to disrupting all his previous arrangements. A cold light surged in Shiryu's eyes. As far as he knew, Zhao Yin was definitely not such an impulsive person. On the contrary, Zhao Yin was narcissistic and self-centered. In the entire bloodthirsty camp, he didn't take anyone seriously except by Ling Shi. How could such a person stand out just out of righteous indignation? There must be a reason, and the reason might lie in Lin Sun. This guy still couldn't control himself. But the timing of his attack is not bad. He not only occupies the moral ground, but also is impeccable. Bai Lingshi didn't know when she opened her eyes again and looked at Zhao Yin. She was very clear that in the ranking of the last war zone assessment, Zhao Yin's ranking was pushed out of the top 3 because of Lin Sun's sudden entry, which made Zhao Yin unconvinced and bear a grudge against Lin Sun. But Bai Lingshi didn't expect that Zhao Yin would be so impatient and choose to challenge Lin Sun at this moment. But soon, Bai Lingshi understood that for Zhao Yin to fight now, he not only occupied the moral ground and won the favor of many trainees, but also got a chance to defeat Lin Sun and wash away his shame. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Of course, Zhao Yin also did this to prove in front of Bai Lingshi that he was not inferior to Lin Sun. But Bai Lingshi didn't want to admit it. The reason why she valued Lin Sun was that his strength was worth it, not because of other thoughts. But obviously, Zhao Yin didn't think so. It's weird. There seems to be something wrong with today's assessment. In the distance, some drill masters whispered. Indeed, as long as the top masters like Lin Sun and Zhao Yin occupy the stone pillars, they don't have to worry about being challenged by other trainees. But Zhao Yin chose to challenge Lin Sun at this moment. I'm afraid there must be a reason for it. Other drill masters also couldn't see through it. Shu Sanqi didn't say anything. He vaguely knew some of the reasons, but he was also a little surprised by Zhao Yin's decision. At this moment, Lin Sun was the most surprised one. He didn't know that Zhao Yin had invisibly held a grudge against him because of her ranking in the war zone. So when he saw Zhao Yin pointing the spear at him at this moment, he couldn't help frowning. Did this guy really regard himself as a savior? Others didn't say anything, but he jumped out directly with an impassioned look, which was really ridiculous. What, Lin Sun, you don't dare? Do you only know how to form gangs and bully others? Zhao Yin asked indifferently with a hint of sarcasm in his voice. But Lin Sun said with a smile, "If you want to challenge me, just come. Don't be so wishy-washy. Do you want to ask whether the opponent agrees to be killed by you or not? It's not demeanor, it's stupidity." When it came to a battle of words, Lin Sun had never been afraid of anyone. It was well known that the word stupidity was usually used to scold voodoo barbarians, but now it was used to describe Zhao Yin, which was extremely ironic and humiliating. This surprised many trainees. They didn't expect that Lin Sun would be so rude. And sure, you couldn't help laughing. Lin Sun had always been a man who refused to suffer losses. Although Zhao Yin's face remained calm, there was an irrepressible haze between his eyebrows, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Good, very good. When you are defeated, I will ask you again, who is the stupidity? In the piercing, cold voice, Zhao Yin's figure flashed like a dragon coming out of the abyss, and he suddenly soared into the air. At this moment, his whole body was surging with strands of dazzling purple luster, as if he had turned into a purple sun in an instant, illuminating the world and overlooking the universe with immeasurable momentum. This was Zhao Yin's unique talent attribute, Purple Sun Body. Chapter 182. The talent attribute was the practitioner's talent for cultivation, including the power of understanding, the root bone, the bloodline, and so on, which were collectively called the talent attribute. According to the Empire's evaluation of the talent attribute that had ever appeared in the world was roughly divided into 9 grades. The first grade was the best. The 9th grade was the last. People with rare talent could cultivate several times faster than ordinary people. What was more terrible was that they were far better than ordinary people in comprehending cultivation methods and refining martial arts. The Purple Sun Body that Zhao Yin showed at the moment was a kind of talent attribute, which could be roughly classified as the 7th grade. Although it was only the 7th grade talent attribute, it had far surpassed ordinary practitioners innately. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was 1 in a million, at least in the entire bloodthirsty camp. The remaining 42 trainees were all the best in the younger generation of the Empire. But so far, only Bai Lingshi and Zhao Yin had the talent attribute. It could be imagined how rare the talent attribute was. At this moment, Zhao Yin brazenly made a move. His whole body was shining like a purple sun, illuminating the world. His momentum was so strong that it immediately attracted the attention of all the people present. This is the Purple Sun Body. It is said that this body is as blazing as the sun, and the spiritual energy cultivated by it has terrible power, which is enough to melt mountains and rivers and incinerate everything. Although Zhao Yin has just reached the peak of the 9th level of martial realm, with his talent attribute, he has already surpassed the first-class level and stands proudly at the top of martial realm. It is very difficult to defeat him. Lin Sun is bold enough to provoke Zhao Yin like this. Now he is in a dilemma. Maybe he will be suppressed out. Many trainees exclaimed and were shocked by the momentum shown by Zhao Yin. Although Lin Sun won the first place in the last war zone assessment, it was just a result. No one could tell how strong his fighting capacity was. But everyone thought that it would be a little difficult for Lin Sun to fight against a top figure like Zhao Yin. The current situation was very interesting. When Zhao Yin took the initiative to challenge Lin Sun, all the other trainees stopped what they were doing and even gave up scrambling for the stone pillars. All of them focused their attention on the peak duel that was about to break out. Even Bai Lingshi could not stay in the state of meditation anymore. She glanced at Zhao Yin and Lin Sun with deep, starry eyes, looking interested. Frowning, Sure you looked at Lin Sun, who was standing alone, and found that Lin Sun looked as calm as usual, without any trace of panic. Sure you was a little relieved. Perhaps this fellow had some other trump card? Sure you decided to take a look first. Ning Meng's face was extremely gloomy. The original plan was disrupted by Zhao Yin, and Lin Sun was also dragged into the water. If Lin was suppressed by Zhao Yin this time and couldn't enter the gang-producing lake, Ning Meng would never forgive himself. Be prepared to rescue him in time. This battle is bound to be fierce. Between Lin Sun and Zhao Yin, one of them is bound to be eliminated. It's too late to turn back. Let's see who will win in the end. In the distance, Shu Sanqi ordered in a deep voice with a grave expression. The other instructors' hearts trembled. If it was another student fighting like this, they wouldn't have paid so much attention to it. But the point was that both Lin Sun and Zhao Yin were now the top trainees in the bloodthirsty camp. No one dared to be careless in the confrontation between them. Zhao Yin is so disgusting. People like him can pass the assessment smoothly as long as they don't fight. But he has to stand out to provoke them. It's too much of a bully. A young man appeared out of nowhere and muttered in a low voice. You can't say that. This is an assessment. It tests the real strength. As long as it doesn't violate the rules, no one could say anything. A drill master refuted this. Seeing that a dispute was about to break out, Shu Sanqi said coldly, "Just watch the battle calmly." As he said, he looked at Lin Sun and Zhao Yin in the distance. The other drill masters also knew that this battle was inevitable, so they all calmed down and looked in the direction of the battle. Clang! With the sound of the sword, a sword appeared in Zhao Yin's hand. The sword was an ordinary spiritual sword, 2 feet and 4 inches long and 3 fingers wide. But when it was held in Zhao Yin's hand, it seemed to transform into a magic weapon. The body of the sword was overflowing with shimmering purple light, like a piece of purple air in the sky. Being held in his hand, it had a kind of majestic and sharp spirit. In an instant, Zhao Yin's momentum rose again. Many trainees' faces changed. Just the momentum made them tremble. Was this the power of the purple sun body? I hope you won't let me down, Zhao Yin said coldly, with his eyebrows full of arrogance. Lin Sun smiled and drew out the green wave saber. After thinking for a while, he suddenly said, "How about we decide the winner with one move?" Everyone was shocked. Lin Sun was too arrogant. Did he think he could defeat Zhao Yin with one move? Why is this guy so reckless? Does he really think he can defeat Zhao Yin with one move? At this time, even Shuri was a little confused. He couldn't understand what Lin Sun was thinking. Deciding the winner with one move meant that there was no room for maneuver. Many people were as puzzled as Shiryu. Many people even thought that Lin Sun was crazy to make such a crazy suggestion. Zhao Yin's eyes were cold like a tide. He said coldly, "Are you sure?" Lin Sun nodded and said, "Of course. I didn't expect you to be so courageous. Unfortunately, courage alone is far from enough. Within one move, I will give you an unforgettable memory." Zhao Yin took a deep breath, and the purple light around him soared. It was so dazzling that people simply didn't dare to look at it. "Then come on." Lin Sun smiled perfunctorily. His eyebrows were like a knife, and his black eyes were like lightning. At this moment, his whole body was enshrouded in a blue aura, giving him a sense of transcendence. The atmosphere in the field suddenly became oppressive and silent. The invisible killing intent was like an undercurrent surging, filling every inch of the air. At this moment, everyone in the field held their breath. They felt an inexplicable oppression, and their expressions couldn't help changing. There was such a terrible momentum in just a confrontation. Once the battle started, how terrible would it be? This move was bound to be an earth-shattering blow. Who was stronger and who was weaker would be determined in an instant. Everyone couldn't help but widen their eyes and hold their breath. Suddenly, Zhao Yin took the lead to move. His whole body was covered with purple mist, and the long sword in his hand stabbed 7 times in an instant, corresponding to 7 different positions in the void. If these 7 positions were connected with lines, it would be the position of the Big Dipper. For a moment, there seemed to be 7 stars suddenly appearing in front of Zhao Yin. The rolling purple mist gushed out of Zhao Yin's body and gathered on the long sword in his hand. Boom! In a trance, people only felt that their souls were shocked. They seemed to see that under the sky, the Big Dipper guarded a purple sun. Endless purple mist was spreading, and it seemed that it was going to sweep the world. That terrible power almost made people's liver and guts break. The Big Dipper encircles the sun, and the purple chi comes from the east. Shu Sanchi's pupils suddenly dilated, and a terrifying electric light flashed through his eyes. This was a move of the Big Dipper crepe myrtle scripture, a unique skill handed down in the imperial royal family. Once it was performed, it was like the Big Dipper descending and the purple sun shining in the sky, and the power release was also extremely terrible. Zhao Yin was the great-grandson of Bao Marquis of the Forbidden City of the Empire, and Bao Marquis was the collateral uncle of the current emperor. In other words, Zhao Yin was also a member of the collateral branch of the imperial royal family. It was not a big deal for him to be able to practice the Big Dipper crepe myrtle scripture, but Shu Sanchi was very clear that it was extremely difficult to practice. For hundreds of years, even among the legitimate descendants of the imperial royal family, few people could successfully practice it. In this case, Zhao Yin could already perform a unique skill of the Big Dipper crepe myrtle scripture, which could be imagined how shocking it was. The most important thing was that Zhao Yin's cultivation was only at the 9th level of the martial realm. Even if he couldn't exert the full power of the Big Dipper crepe myrtle scripture, it was already too incredible that he could use this move. Perhaps this was the terror of the innate attribute purple sun body. In the field, many trainees were in a trance and shocked. Except for those drill masters and Chu, only a few trainees could keep calm like Shu Sanchi. Bai Lingshi, Li Duxing, and others all contracted their pupils at this moment, and a touch of surprise emerged in their hearts. They all clearly remembered that Zhao Yin had never performed this move in the one-year training in the bloodthirsty camp. Didn't this mean that he had a backup all the time? Could Lin Sun block this blow? It was very difficult. At least Bai Lingshi and others thought that it might be possible to just block this blow. But so what? If Lin couldn't break Zhao Yin's move and defeat Zhao Yin with this blow, then Lin Sun would definitely lose. But it was obvious that Lin Sun's chance of winning had become slim. All this took a long time to describe, but in fact, it happened in an instant. Different people's different reactions were incredibly fast. Everyone was attracted by Zhao Yin's blow, so no one noticed that Lin Sun also cut out his saber when Zhao Yin made his move. Buzz! A strange sound of saber rang out suddenly. The saber cry was like a sigh that came from the depths of the starry sky, and it was indistinct like a dream. After that, everyone felt their vision blur, and they didn't even have the time to react before they saw numerous stars falling from the eternal veil of night. It was just like comets falling with dazzling fire, so dazzling, so bright, and so terrible, as if doomsday was coming, full of the power to destroy everything. Many people fell into a great horror, with a sense of despair and helplessness that there was no way to escape. This is... Shu Sanchi suddenly clenched his fists, with a touch of surprise on his face. This... Bai Lingshi suddenly stood up, with illusory luster steaming in her starry eyes. At the same time, Li Duxing suddenly took a deep breath, as if he was suppressing the palpitation in his heart that was about to be uncontrollable. Many drill masters in the distance all changed their expressions. At this moment, time seemed to freeze. It could be clearly seen that the 7 stars of the Big Dipper around Zhao Yin's body were falling one by one, and the rolling purple air was being swallowed by the endless darkness. Then, a flash of saber light suddenly appeared from the darkness, splitting all the soul-stirring scenes. Zhao Yin's figure, which was as dazzling as the purple sun, seemed to lose all its luster, and his figure suddenly dimmed. This move was called collecting stars. Chapter 183. When many trainees woke up from the shock, the battle had already ended, but the atmosphere in the field was indescribably weird. Shu Sanchi and other drill masters all looked solemn, doubtful, incredulous, or silent. On the other side, Bai Lingshi stood up. Her dress and long hair were fluttering in the wind, but she didn't seem to notice it. She stared blankly into the distance, with a trace of confusion on her beautiful face. Li Duxing was taking a deep breath, as if he was calming down the turbulent emotions in his heart. No one spoke, and the atmosphere was filled with a shocking, deathly silence. When the students' gazes swept across the battlefield, they were all stunned. Zhao Yin lay on the ground, unconscious. His body was in a strange and twisted state, as if he had suffered unimaginable pain before he fainted. Moreover, there was still an expression of panic, bewilderment, and unwillingness on his face. Before the battle, he was like a purple sun illuminating the world, with immeasurable divine power and looking down on the mountains and rivers. But now, he looked so miserable and pitiful. Looking at the stone pillar again, Lin Sun's handsome figure was still standing alone. He was unscathed, but his face was a little pale. But now, in the eyes of the trainees, he seemed to be shrouded in an indescribable majesty, which made them feel awe. Zhao Yin is defeated. Finally, someone spoke, and it broke this silent and strange atmosphere, causing everyone to sober up completely. What happened just now? I don't know. I just saw stars falling from the eternal night, as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Me too. Zhao Yin, who has the body of purple sun, was defeated. Incredible, incredible. The discussion was like boiling water, and the whole field was in an uproar. Many trainees couldn't believe it. It was indeed one move to decide the outcome, but they didn't see how Zhao Yin was defeated. It was too amazing. Sure, you let out a long breath and looked at Lin Sun with a complicated look. It turned out that this guy had been hiding his strength all the time. Ningming laughed out loud. What he worried about most didn't happen, which made him feel extremely relieved and happy. Bai Lingshi sat back on the stone pillar. However, her eyebrows were slightly furrowed as she pondered, as if she had encountered a difficult problem. Li Duxing regained his former silence, but occasionally glanced at Lin Sun in the distance. No one knew what he was thinking. "Boss, have you ever heard of this kind of saber technique?" In the distance, an instructor couldn't help but ask, causing the other instructors to look at Shu Sanqi. They were also wondering what kind of saber play Lin Sun had displayed just now and why it had such incredible power. It could even be said that this kind of power was not something that a true martial realm cultivator could display. Never seen him before. Shu's answer disappointed the other drill masters and made them more surprised, which added a mysterious atmosphere to their impression of Lin. The outcome of the battle has already been decided. Go and rescue Zhao Yin. Although he has been defeated, he cannot be left lying there without any dignity. Shu Sanqi gave an order. Immediately, an instructor went out and brought Zhao Yin back in a coma. After making sure that Zhao Yin was not in danger of dying, Shu Sanqi was relieved. He waved his hand and said, "Continue the assessment." Zhao Yin was defeated in one move, which caused great shock. But in the middle of the assessment, many trainees who didn't get the stone pillars had no time to sigh with emotion and began to take action. Most importantly, Zhao Yin's crushing defeat meant that he was completely eliminated and had no chance to enter the game-producing lake. As a result, the stone pillar that Zhao Yin had snatched was now empty, and it became a target for everyone to fight over. At the same time, the trainees who got the stone pillars became vigilant again in case of being robbed by others. But no matter what, because of the earth-shattering battle just now, all the trainees realized how terrible Lin Sun was again. At this moment, no one dared to have any ideas about Lin Sun. Even Ning Meng's team didn't dare to approach him. This undoubtedly made Lin Sun feel relieved. He directly sat on the ground with his legs crossed and carefully perceived the situation around him. As early as in the Demon Cloud Ridge, Lin Sun could barely perform RFS twice with all his strength, which was his limit. After returning from the Demon Cloud Ridge, under the special guidance of Young Ku, his strength had improved by leaps and bounds. Not only had he reached the mastery of the 9th level of martial realm, but also the 8th spiritual star in his sea of consciousness had been lit up. All these made him exert more power than before in the battle with Zhao Yin, thus suppressing him at one stroke. Of course, the most important thing was that the power of RFS was too strong. It should be noted that Lin Sun hadn't fully grasped the essence of RFS so far, and he hadn't exerted even 1/10 of its power. But under such circumstances, he could still suppress Zhao Yin with one blow, which showed how terrible the power of this move was. Lin Sun couldn't even imagine how terrible the destructive power would be when he completely grasped the essence of RFS and could exert its full power. This was the first move of Tian Yuan saber play. In addition to RFS, there were also Moondrawing move and Sunburning move. It could be foreseen that the power of the latter two moves would absolutely not be weaker than that of RFS, or even stronger. And all this, of course, was the gift of the heaven accessing place. At the thought of this, Lin Sun couldn't help but feel moved. He calculated the time and found that he could enter the heaven accessing place again in a little more than half a year. Hey, you're really strong this time. You not only defeated Zhao Yin, but also made it impossible for him to enter the gang-producing lake. You're really overbearing. Shiryu's voice suddenly came. Lin Sun sensed his cultivation in his body and confirmed that there was still more than half of his strength left. Then he was completely relieved and said casually, "What? Do you think I've gone too far?" Shiryu shook his head. "No, I'm just thinking that if Zhao Yin wakes up, he will bear a grudge against you because of this. You know his origin. He has a relationship with the royal family of the empire. His grandfather, Marquis Baoong, is the uncle of the current emperor. If he bears a grudge against you, there will be endless troubles in the future." Lin Sun frowned. "You seem to be gloating?" Shiryu smiled bitterly. "I dare not. I'm just reminding you." Lin Sun thought for a while and shrugged his shoulders carelessly. "It's okay. I believe that if I get into trouble in the future, you and Ning Meng will definitely help me." Shiryu was instantly stunned. "How can you be as shameless as that idiot?" Lin Sun said with a smile. "I have no choice. I find that if I'm not shameless, I will only be cheated by you too." Shiryu supported his forehead with his hand and sighed. "I'm not careful in making friends." While they were talking, the battle in the field was constantly breaking out. In order to fight for a stone pillar, those trainees seemed to be crazy and exerted all their means, filling the air with smoke. But as time went on, trainees were defeated one after another. They were either knocked out or directly seriously injured and unable to fight again. Shiryu was inevitably chosen as an opponent. But in the end, Shiryu won the battle without any accident. Lin Sun noticed that among all the trainees in the field, the trainees of Camp 39 accounted for the largest proportion. There were as many as 7 people. In addition to Lin Sun, there were Shiryu, Ning Meng, Li Duxing, Gong Ming, Qi Kan, and Yi Qi. But among them, only Lin Sun, Ning Meng, Shiryu, and Li Duxing occupied a stone pillar. Gong Ming, Qi Kan, and Yi Qi were still fighting for it. Before long, Yi Qi was defeated. This fat teenager with small eyes who was good at attracting hatred turned around and left freely after knowing that he had no hope. Not long after Yi Qi was defeated, Qi Kan also encountered a crisis and directly fainted on the ground. Seeing him reduced to such a situation, Lin Sun didn't feel anything. In Camp 39, Qi Kan, Xin Wenbin, and Wen Mingxiu hated Lin Sun the most. Xin Wenbin and others had been eliminated in the previous assessments. Now only Qi Kan was left. But it was a pity that even he didn't make it to the end. When there was only 1 minute left in the assessment, there was only one trainee who hadn't grabbed a stone pillar. His name was Feng Lin. He had been defeated several times in a row, but he still persisted. But it was obvious that he had almost no hope to change anything in the last minute. But it was strange that Feng Lin didn't admit defeat, which surprised many people. However, when Lin Sun noticed that Feng Lin's eyes finally locked on Ning Meng, he narrowed his eyes. In the last minute, if Feng Lin went to grab Ning Meng's stone pillar, even if Lin Sun helped him, it would be a little urgent, and many variables could easily happen. "Don't worry about that idiot. Just watch." Suddenly, Shiryu's voice came, with a sense of mysteriousness. This made Lin Sun's heart skip a beat. He looked at Ning Meng in the distance. Almost at the same time, Feng Lin brazenly attacked Ning Meng as expected. Obviously, in his opinion, Ning Meng was seriously injured. Besides, there was not much time left in the assessment. Even if Lin Sun helped, it would be difficult to save Ning Meng. Therefore, he attacked without hesitation. But at this moment, Ning Meng, who had already noticed all this, suddenly sneered, as if he had known this would happen. Oh no! Fenlin also felt something was wrong, but he had already rushed over, and there was no turning back. He could only grit his teeth and fight with all his strength. He fiercely chopped at Ning Meng with his saber. But almost at the same time, Ning Meng suddenly shouted. His long halberd danced in the air, wrapped in terrible lightning, and smashed down fiercely like a waterfall. With a loud bang, Fenlin was shaken and flew out, screaming. Bah! Do you really think I can't fight anymore? Who doesn't leave some trump cards for himself? You're as blind as a bat. Ning Meng's face was full of contempt. Seeing this scene, everyone was stunned. Had this guy been pretending to be weak all the time? Lin Sun couldn't help twitching the corner of his mouth. This guy was absolutely a black-bellied man. Never be deceived by his rough and reckless appearance in the future. At this time, the bell for the end of the assessment rang. Chapter 184. At the end of the assessment, the 30 trainees who occupied a stone pillar each felt relaxed and relieved. Didn't they experience a year of cruel and abnormal training in the bloodthirsty camp for this moment? Now, they had passed the assessment and were qualified to enter the game-producing lake. As long as they broke through, they would become the first-class practitioners of Gang Spirit Realm in the world. This was the ultimate purpose of their coming to the bloodthirsty camp. Damn it, it's finally over. Ning Meng squatted on the stone pillar, his face full of complacency. This time, he defeated Zhang Sun Hung and finally vented his anger that had been suppressed in his heart for many years. When I go home this time, I'd like to see who dares to stop me from hitting on Zhao Zijin. Sure, you murmured, as if he was looking forward to something. Lin Sun smiled and remembered the words of the old man from Heiyao Shrine when he was sent to the bloodthirsty camp. Now, the training of the bloodthirsty camp was coming to an end. Would he tell him about Shia solstice? At this moment, many trainees had their own thoughts. A year of training was like isolation from the world, which made them almost forget their previous life. Now that this boring and cruel life was coming to an end, they realized that they were going to leave soon. It was unknown when Shu Sanchi came to the field. He glanced around with his sharp eyes and said in a low voice, "The stone pillars under your feet are the passageways leading to the game-producing lake. 3 days later, the passageways will be opened. But before that, you need to do one thing." Hearing this, the trainees were shocked and restrained all kinds of thoughts. One more thing? Shu Sanchi waved his hand, and a group of drill masters came one after another and awarded each trainee a blood-colored badge about the size of a copper coin. The front of the badge was painted with a sword, and below it was a line of words. Xiao Flower is invincible because of bloodthirst, and the Empire is everlasting because of war. The sword was inserted into the sky, and the words were like dripping blood. On the back of the badge, the code of each trainee in the camp was engraved. Lin Sun's badge was written with the number 19. This is the bloodthirsty badge. Only the trainees who really stick to the end are qualified to wear it. After you leave, the power of this badge will be your most reliable support. At this moment, Shu Sanchi looked unprecedentedly serious and majestic, and his voice was as firm as iron with unquestionable power. Many students were shocked, and they held the bloodthirsty badge in their hands tightly. "Please take good care of it," Shu Sanchi said word by word. Looking at Shu Sanchi, it suddenly occurred to Lin that the name Shu Sanchi was also a code name given to Drill Master Su when he was training in the bloodthirsty camp. Perhaps in the future, he could also call himself Lin 19. Lin Sun shook his head and put away the bloodthirsty badge carefully. It represented not only honor, but also his training career in the bloodthirsty camp for 1 year. This was an extremely precious item, branded with the traces of his youth. After awarding the bloodthirsty badges, Shu Sanchi didn't waste any more words. He arranged a drill master to introduce to the trainees what they needed to pay attention to when they entered the game-producing lake. This instructor was the obese middle-aged man who often appeared beside young Ko. Lin Sun had a deep impression of him, but since old Mo left, Lin Sun rarely saw this fatty middle-aged. It was also at this time that he learned that the obese middle-aged man was called Chao Shirlu. Obviously, like Shu Sanqi, this name should be a code name. The gang-producing lake is a godsend. Every 10 years, a lot of pure, original gang qi will gush out. Chao Shirliu's voice was warm and calm. You all know that there are many kinds of gang qi, but only original gang qi is the purest gang qi in the world. It was quiet in the field, and only Chao Shirliu's voice was echoing. All the trainees listened carefully for fear of missing any details. 3 days later, on the stone pillars in the field, Lin Sun and other 30 trainees waited quietly. With a unique, buzzing sound, the black rocks on the surface of the whole field, which were engraved with numerous dense spiritual tattoos, seemed to wake up from silence at this moment, diffusing rays of dazzling light. Those rays of light gathered on the 30 stone pillars, covering every trainee. It was dreamlike and extraordinary. Boom! In just a moment, a spiritual storm suddenly emerged in the field, tearing and twisting the heaven and earth, which was extremely terrifying. It could be clearly seen that the trainees were all drawn into the whirlpools that emerged out of thin air and suddenly disappeared. At this point, the storm in the field disappeared, and the spiritual light on the black rocks on the ground gradually dissipated. The field returned to normal. Finally, it opens again. I wonder how many trainees can condense the first-class pond of spiritual power in their sea of qi when they reach the gang spirit realm this time. In the distance, a group of drill masters witnessed this scene, and some couldn't help sighing with emotion. There should be a lot of them. After all, the number of trainees entering the gang-producing lake this time is the largest among all sessions. Besides, each trainee's aptitude and comprehension are the best. I have a hunch that their breakthroughs in the gang-producing lake may also break the records of the previous sessions. Someone analyzed in a low voice. That's for sure. There's no doubt that by Li Duxing and Lin Sun will be able to condense the first-class pond of spiritual power. Chao Shirlu said with a smile. Not necessarily. Take Lin Sun as an example. It seems that his fighting capacity is no less than that of Bai and Li Duxing, but his foundation is still not good enough. Shu Sanqi looked calm and said, You all know that most of these trainees have reached the fulfillment of the 9th level of martial realm several years ago. In order to enter the gang-producing lake, they have suppressed their realms for several years. But Lin Sun is different. When he entered the bloodthirsty camp a year ago, he was only at the 6th level of martial realm. 2 months ago, he broke through to the 9th level of martial realm. Although his cultivation speed is amazing, his foundation is not as good as Lin Sun's. Hearing this, the other drill masters all nodded and agreed with him. Lin Sun's progress was indeed very fast, which even amazed them. But it was not a good thing to be fast. If the foundation was not solid enough, it would affect the strength that could be condensed in the breakthrough. After all, the gang spirit realm was completely different from the martial realm. The gang spirit realm had begun to step on the road of cultivation. The more solid the foundation, the more benefits one could get in the breakthrough. But Lin Sun made successive breakthroughs in a year. It seemed fast, but in fact, it made people doubt whether his foundation was solid enough. His foundation is very solid, which is incomparable to ordinary people. Suddenly, Young Ku said, Don't forget that Lin Sun once defeated trainees on the 9th level of martial realm when he was at the 6th level of martial realm. And every time he makes a breakthrough, his fighting capacity will undergo a new transformation. Do you doubt that the death of the 2nd level elite barbarian soldier in the Demon Cloud Ridge was really because of Lin Sun's good luck? Yes, even if Lin Sun's foundation is a little weak, it should not be a problem for him to condense a first-class pond of spiritual power in the gang-producing lake this time. Young man echoed on the side. The twin sisters, who had a bad relationship with each other, expressed the same idea at this moment, which surprised all the other drill masters. We'll know whether he can or not by looking at the spiritual projector later, Shu Sanqi said, and then turned around and left. The drill masters hurriedly followed him. They all knew that Shu Sanchi was going to open the spiritual projector in the gang spirit lake. Through the spiritual projector, they could clearly see the characteristics of each trainee when he made a breakthrough, so as to judge the quality of the pond of spiritual power they condensed. Lin Sun felt dizzy. When he woke up, he found himself standing in front of a lake. The lake wasn't large, only having a circumference of 1 mu. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it a small pond. However, the water of the lake seemed extremely unique. It was as clear as jade, and it reflected the sky and clouds, as if it had merged with the sky. Wisps of mist curled up from the surface of the lake, like smoke and dream. In the middle of the lake, there were floating stone platforms shaped like lotus seats. There were exactly 30 of them. This was the gang-producing lake. It might seem inconspicuous, but the lake was filled with the most quintessential liquid formed from stellar energy. Each drop contained an unimaginably terrible power. But at the same time, this lake was extremely dangerous. According to Chao Shirlio's introduction, even a sea spirit realm practitioner would be torn to pieces by the terrible gang chi once he fell into the gang-producing lake rashly. Sea spirit realm practitioners could fly in the sky, drill into the ground, and summon wind and rain. Even such a person could be killed by the gang-producing lake, so the danger in it was self-evident. Is this the legendary gang-producing lake? This is a great opportunity. In the entire empire, there are very few known places of opportunity like this. Now, it's right in front of us for us to pick. Haha. With a burst of exclamations, other trainees also appeared near the gang-producing lake, eager to have a try with burning eyes. I heard that the longer you persist in practicing in the gang spirit lake, the more benefits you will get when you make a breakthrough. I don't know whether it's true or not. Sure, you said, not far away. He also couldn't hide the joy on his face, which showed how attractive the gang-producing lake was to him. Let's have a try and know whether it's true or not. On the other side, Ning Ming shouted and took the lead to rush to a lotus-shaped stone platform on the lake. Seeing this, other trainees also came to their senses. They didn't have time to be excited and started to seize the stone platforms one by one. When Lin was about to take action, he was suddenly stopped. It was by Ling Shi, the beautiful girl in white. No one knew when she had approached Lin Sun. She looked at Lin Sun with tranquil eyes and said, I said a long time ago that I would challenge you when you reached the 9th level of martial realm. Do you still remember? Lin frowned at once. Are you going to fight here? Chapter 185. Lin Sun was a little impatient. He didn't want to fight with Bai Ling Shi at this moment. It was not because he was afraid of her, but because the gang-producing lake was right in front of him. Who would be in a mood to fight now? If Bai Ling Shi insisted, Lin Sun was even ready to refuse her. Unexpectedly, Bai Ling Shi shook her head and said, It's not necessary to fight. You and I can have a competition when we break through to the gang spirit realm. Lin Sun breathed a sigh of relief and asked, What competition? Bai Ling Shi pointed to the gang-producing lake and said indifferently, The one who can hold on for a longer time and whose pond of spiritual power is of higher quality when he breaks through. This was not a challenge at all. No matter whether Bai Ling Shi proposed it or not, Lin Sun would definitely try his best. After all, this was a godsend opportunity. Who would hold back at such a time? After thinking for a while, Lin Sun agreed without hesitation. Bai Ling Shi didn't say anything more. Like an ethereal shadow, she landed on a lotus-shaped stone platform in a twinkling of an eye. Lin Sun didn't waste any more time. He went straight to the last lotus-shaped stone platform in the lake and sat down cross-legged. Their conversation was not concealed. So many trainees present heard it, which made them feel unbalanced. Bai Ling Shi only chose Lin Sun as her challenge target. Didn't it mean that in her eyes, other trainees were not as good as Lin Sun? Many trainees made up their minds to see who could hold on for the longest time in the gang-producing lake. The stone platform was like a lotus floating on the lake. It was unknown what material it was made of, but it was as smooth as jade, giving off a chill. Sitting cross-legged on it, Lin Sun immediately felt a stream of pure gang chi gushing out like a knife and drilling into his body, making his skin tingle and blood seemed to be frozen. Gang Qi. At the end of the day, this was an extremely special type of spiritual energy, but its power was extremely great, and it had inconceivable uses. There were thousands of kinds of Gang Qi in the world, including Gang of Yin and Yang, Gang of Fire, Gang of Ice, Gang of Wood, and so on. However, for practitioners, there were at least a few kinds of Gang Qi that could be used to refine the spiritual power in their bodies. For example, the original Gang Qi in the Gang-producing lake was a first-class treasure in the world. It was not only pure in quality, but also perfectly matched the power of practitioners' cultivation. This sort of energy was extremely rare and precious, and it was a treasure of fortune that could only be chanced upon by luck. Rumble. Feeling the prickling pain all over his body, Lin dared not hesitate any longer. He held his breath and concentrated on keeping his mind empty. Then he began to run the Nature Insight and Spirit Devour scripture. The vigorous spiritual energy in his body roared and circulated along his meridians and acupoints. Crash! Almost in an instant, a pure and icy aura of Gang Qi was swallowed into his body. Like a sharp blade, it began to refine and polish the spiritual power in his body. Lin Sun felt as if he was in a 1,000-year ice cellar, and his whole body was invaded by the biting ice. The Gang Qi seemed pure and clear, but it actually had an extremely terrible sharpness. Even with Lin Sun's current physique and cultivation, he still felt waves of tingling. Now, Lin Sun was finally convinced that what Chao Shilu said 3 days ago was true. Their 1-year training in the bloodthirsty camp was actually to polish their foundation for entering the gang-producing lake. Without a strong physique and cultivation, it was impossible for them to resist and refine the impact force from the original Gang Qi. A series of muffled groans sounded one after another. At this moment, trainees sitting cross-legged on different stone platforms all looked a little blue and shivered all over. Obviously, like Lin Sun, they were suffering from the biting cold. Some people even cried out in pain because their cultivation was interrupted directly. They looked a little embarrassed. Comparatively speaking, Lin Sun's performance was not bad. At least, his expression was still calm, and he was not disturbed in his cultivation. But compared with a moment ago, he was obviously much more careful. While running the Nature Insight and Spirit Devour scripture with all his strength, he carefully perceived the changes in his body. As time went by, Lin Sun soon adapted to the biting cold and immersed himself in cultivation. His back was ramrod straight, his expression calm, and there was an otherworldly aura between his brows. He sat there upright, like a clay statue, not moving in the slightest. His entire body was suffused with strands of white mist that enveloped his entire body, and it added a pure and ethereal bearing to him. A few days ago, Lin Sun just reached the consummation of the 9th level of martial realm, and the spiritual energy inside and outside of his body changed. It could be said that he had reached the consummation of spirit transformation. Therefore, Lin Sun was not worried about breaking through to the gang spirit realm. His foundation had been refined far beyond his peers. Plus the 4 spiritual vortexes on the 4 acupoints of the heart vessel and the assistance of the Nature Insight and Spirit Devour scripture, his spiritual energy was refined to the extreme. The quality and power of his spiritual energy were so high that they could be described as terrifying. Under such circumstances, the only thing Lin Sun was uncertain about was how high the quality of the pond of spiritual power opened in the ocean of qi in his body would be after he reached the gang spirit realm. Everyone, not just Lin Sun, had this kind of worry. It was well known that the pond of spiritual power was the symbol of a practitioner in the gang spirit realm. It was opened in the ocean of qi and gathered all the strength of the practitioner. The quality of the pond of spiritual power was directly related to the practitioner's future cultivation. Whether a practitioner's fighting capacity was strong or not, whether his power was strong or not, and whether he could have a more profound cultivation path in the future were almost closely related to the quality of the pond of spiritual power. Under such circumstances, no one could care less. The reason why trainees like Bai Lingshi, Shi Yu, and Ning Meng suppressed their realms was to condense the most perfect pond of spiritual power when they reached the gang spirit realm. Cultivating in the gang-producing lake was a heaven-sent opportunity to shape the quality of the pond of spiritual power. As for who could finally condense a satisfactory pond of spiritual power, it depended on one's root bone, aptitude, foundation, and talent. Time flowed like water. 3 days passed in a hurry. On the gang-producing lake, 30 trainees were meditating quietly like statues that had existed for thousands of years. There were different visions around them. Like Bai Lingshi, the white fog around her was like stars, shining with clear luster, as if dancing in the air, which was extraordinary. As Li Duxing breathed, the white fog was sharp like an arrow, producing the sound of wind and thunder. When Shi Yu was cultivating, the white mist around him was like a tidal wave, carrying with it a unique rhythm, mysterious and natural. Ning Meng was extremely domineering. The airwaves around him were like smoke rising to the sky, like the clanging of weapons and the clanging of iron armors. Lin Sun, on the other hand, was silent, like a calm sea. On the contrary, he seemed to be very calm, without any special features. This kind of vision varied from person to person and showed different characteristics according to the different cultivation methods. However, as long as one carefully compared them, one could still see many things. In the central camp of the bloodthirsty camp, a huge light curtain reflected all the scenes in detail. Shu Sanqi and other drill masters watched silently, analyzing the different performances of each trainee in their hearts. Suddenly, Shu Sanqi said, "In the past, some trainees would break through to the gang spirit realm after cultivating for 3 days at most. Based on this speculation, perhaps someone in this batch of trainees will reach the gang spirit realm today." The other drill masters all nodded. Just by observing the visions of each trainee, I can roughly judge that Bai Lingshi, Li Duxing, Gong Ming, Shi Yu, Meng Xiulin, Ouyang Jun, and Ning Meng are destined to condense the first-class pond of spiritual power. Some drill masters whispered, which aroused a lot of approval. It's a pity that Zhao Yin was eliminated. Otherwise, with his purple sun body, he is destined to achieve this step. Some drill masters expressed regret for Zhao Yin's failure. Zhao Yin took the initiative to provoke and was defeated. He can only blame himself for being overconfident, not Lin Sun's fault. Young Ke said indifferently. Speaking of Lin Sun, his current performance is a bit mediocre. Maybe it's because of the lack of foundation. If I remember correctly, he just reached the mastery of the 9th level of martial realm a few days ago, right? Many drill masters were curious. Lin Sun's previous performances had broken their expectations again and again, so they dared not underestimate him anymore. However, his current performance in the gang-producing lake was a bit mediocre, which made people doubt that Lin Sun seemed to be inferior to other trainees in terms of cultivation foundation. Young Ke frowned and didn't say anything. She was also a little uncertain. Lin Sun's cultivation speed was very fast, and his fighting capacity was extremely strong, which had been proved again and again. There was no doubt about it. However, cultivation foundation was different from fighting. It had a great relationship with the practitioner's own aptitude and root. Besides, it needed to be forged by the accumulation of polishing and quenching over a long period of time, which was not something that could be achieved overnight. Other trainees had been refining their foundation since childhood. In order to enter the gang-producing lake for cultivation this time, they even suppressed their realms for several years. It could be imagined how profound their foundation was. Compared with them, Lin Sun indeed seemed to be inferior. Since you look down on Lin Sun so much, why don't we make another bet? Young man suddenly opened her mouth and looked at the crowd with a smile. Everyone was in a daze. They all remembered that they lost to Young Man last time because of the quarterly assessment and shook their heads subconsciously. But they were still not convinced. Someone couldn't help saying, "Young man, are you so confident in this boy?" Young man said, "Of course. What level of pond of spiritual power do you think Lin Sun can condense?" Young man answered without hesitation, It must be the first level. The crowd couldn't help laughing. They thought young man was a little impulsive and didn't take it seriously. They didn't argue with young man anymore. When the result came out, it would be clear at a glance. Young man saw everyone's expression and couldn't help feeling depressed. She couldn't wait for Lin Sun to make a breakthrough and slap these guys in the face with facts. Suddenly, someone shouted, "Someone has made a breakthrough!" Chapter 186. It was a young man named Yun Zheng who made the breakthrough. At this moment, his aura was surging and his spiritual energy was roaring. His momentum was rising steadily. It could be clearly seen that on the stone platform where he sat cross-legged, there were wisps of golden rain-like luster, which was very beautiful. Seeing this scene, many drill masters couldn't help but sigh. Golden Gang, turning into rain, was a sign of the second-grade pond of spiritual power. That was to say, Yun Zheng condensed the second-grade pond of spiritual power with the help of gang-producing lake, which is a bit unsatisfactory. It was well known that Gang Spirit Realm was divided into 3 realms, namely Human Gang Realm, Earth Gang Realm, and Heaven Gang Realm. When a practitioner advanced to Gang Spirit Realm, he became a Human Gang Realm strongman. The pond of spiritual power opened in the ocean of Qi was the sign of advancing to Human Gang Realm. In this realm, the spiritual energy was tempered by gang force and turned into gang force. According to its appearance, the pond of spiritual power was divided into 3 grades. First grade pond of spiritual power was generally called Heaven's Favor, which meant that the pond of spiritual power was condensed by God. This kind of pond of spiritual power could condense the pond of spiritual power in the body into different forms. In the thousands of years of history of the Empire, there were Green Lotus of Fire, Coffin of Storm, Wings of Wind, Tower of Gold, Sumru Bead. All of them were first-grade pond of spiritual power. Those who owned such a pond of spiritual power were often praised as the rare geniuses in 10,000 years. Once they made the breakthrough, their cultivation foundation and strength were enough to sweep away those in the same realm. The second-grade pond of spiritual power was collectively known as the Earth Bell Spirit, and the vision it presented was like the gathering of the fortune of the earth. The Golden Gang Rain condensed by Yun Zheng's advancement was a kind of second-grade pond of spiritual power. Those who owned such a pond of spiritual power were praised as the rare geniuses in 1,000 years. They could be called extraordinary and outstanding. The third-grade pond of spiritual power was the common Human Gang Realm strongman. Most of the Human Gang Realm practitioners in the world could be classified into this category. It was also the most common kind of pond of spiritual power. From this, it could be judged how big the gap between the 3 grades of pond of spiritual power was. Having ponds of spiritual power of different grades was equivalent to having a completely different cultivation path. Their future cultivation path, strength, and achievements were destined to be completely different. Of course, there were no absolutes in this world. It was just that it was extremely difficult to change this gap, and the chances were slim. This was the importance of the pond of spiritual power. Now that Yun Zheng had obtained the second-class pond of spiritual power, he was destined to be far away from the practitioners who had the first-class pond of spiritual power in the future. If he wanted to achieve more, he had to work 10 times or even 100 times harder. This was also the reason why all the instructors sighed. Cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. A single step was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. These instructors were all experienced, so they naturally knew this better. It's not bad to have the pond of spiritual power of Golden Gang Rain. At least when I walk out of the bloodthirsty camp, I can be called an extraordinary person. If I work hard, I can also become an influential figure in the Empire. Chao Shilu said softly, "We can't expect too much. Compared with most practitioners in the world, the trainees of our bloodthirsty camp are already rare first-class talents." The other instructors all agreed with this view. Indeed, in the entire empire, practitioners who had the second-class pond of spiritual power were quite rare, 1 in 1,000. Yun Zheng was already extremely excellent to have such an achievement. But compared with other trainees of the bloodthirsty camp, he seemed very ordinary. Yinzheng woke up from cultivation not long after his promotion. Looking at the trainees who were still cultivating quietly around him, and then comparing it with the second-class pond of spiritual power that he had obtained, he couldn't help but feel a touch of bitterness. With the help of the game-producing lake, he couldn't condense the first-class pond of spiritual power, which inevitably made him feel depressed. Before long, a whirlpool suddenly appeared around the stone platform out of thin air, sucking Yunzheng into it and taking him out of the game-producing lake. Several hours after Yunzheng left, trainees made breakthroughs one after another, and the time interval between each trainee's promotion was not long. What made Shu Sanqi and others who had been paying attention to all this feel regretful was that no trainee had condensed the first-class pond of spiritual power in the process. All of them had the second-class pond of spiritual power. If this scene happened in the outside world, it would definitely cause a great sensation. Countless practitioners were in an uproar, dumbfounded, and felt incredible. After all, the second-class pond of spiritual power was also very rare, and those who could have it were all the most talented ones in 1,000. But in Shu Sanqi's view, this situation was quite normal and not worth paying attention to. After all, these trainees were extremely excellent, and with the help of the game-producing lake, it would be strange if they couldn't condense the second-class pond of spiritual power. Another 2 days had passed since Yunzheng was the first trainee to reach the human gang realm. During these 2 days, 13 trainees successively made breakthroughs. But still, no one had condensed the first-class pond of spiritual power. This made many drill masters frown. It was not a good sign that half of the trainees had made breakthroughs, but no one had condensed the first-class pond of spiritual power. Facing this situation, Shu Sanqi could only keep silent. This year's trainees were indeed different from the previous years. The number of trainees entering the game-producing lake was much higher than that of the previous years. According to Shu Sanqi's estimation, if about 6 of the 30 trainees could get the first-class pond of spiritual power, it would be enough to break the previous record. Would this happen? Shu Sanqi was not sure at this time. Another 3 days passed quickly. The drill masters gathered in the camp all felt a little tired. The long wait had almost exhausted their patience. By now, 21 trainees had made breakthroughs, but all of them had condensed the second-class pond of spiritual power. In other words, there were only 9 trainees who hadn't made breakthroughs in the game-producing lake. How many of them could condense the first-class pond of spiritual power? No one dared to talk nonsense. This was cultivation. Sometimes, there are many unpredictable variables in something that seem to be extremely certain of something. This kind of variable in cultivation was also called luck. If luck was good, even a pig could develop spiritual wisdom. If luck was not good, even the most outstanding genius was destined to suffer setbacks. In this dull atmosphere, a sudden exclamation sounded. "It's here! It's here!" Whoosh! All the drill masters were shocked and looked at the huge light screen projected by the spiritual projector at the same time. On the light screen, over the head of Gong Ming, who was sitting cross-legged on the stone platform, a dazzling fire glow suddenly emerged. It kept gathering and finally turned into a funnel-like pagoda. The fire glow turned into a pagoda, as if burning in the sky, illuminating the mountains and rivers. First-class pond of spiritual power, Fire Spirit Pagoda. Shu Sanqi and other drill masters were all moved, and their eyes were full of amazement. Fire Spirit Pagoda was just a name. In fact, it referred to the pond of spiritual power condensed by Gong Ming, which was shaped like a pagoda with a wisp of natural spiritual fire in it. It could play an incredible role in cultivation. This was the first-class pond of spiritual power, known as God's favor, full of unimaginable mysterious power, like a gift from God. Gong Ming was born in the Gong family, which has the title of tumbler. The fire turtle's infusion skill he cultivated perfectly matches the pond of spiritual power he condensed. "It's really amazing," someone exclaimed. At this time, another person made a breakthrough in the game-producing lake. Obviously, the moment he made a breakthrough, the sky was filled with thunder and dancing silver snakes, which was earth-shattering. It was Ningming. At this moment, he also made a breakthrough. Judging from a strange phenomenon caused by his breakthrough, it was obvious that he had condensed the first-class pond of spiritual power. Shu Sanqi and other drill masters were shocked again. They could clearly see that the thunder and lightning all over the sky intertwined and turned into the shape of a book. What's this? Many drill masters were confused. They didn't remember that there was any first-class pond of spiritual power in the world that could show such a strange phenomenon. After a moment of silence, Shu Sanqi said, "This should be thunder spirit scripture. If I'm right, this kind of pond of spiritual power hasn't appeared for hundreds of years." Everyone was shocked in their hearts. Gongming's fire spirit pagoda and Ningming's thunder spirit scripture appeared one after another, and both of them were first-class ponds of spiritual power. This scene was really amazing, but didn't end there. Soon after Ningming made a breakthrough, Shi Yu, a boy named Ouyang Zhuan, and a girl named Meng Shilin broke through to the human gang realm at the same time. In an instant, 3 completely different scenes appeared in the sky. A silver tide rose and fell like the Milky Way. Clear and translucent flowers bloomed in the air one after another. A majestic cyan eagle spread its wings and roared proudly in the sky. These 3 scenes represented 3 completely different ponds of spiritual power, and all of them were first class. Title: Milky Way, Bodhi Spiritual Flower, Cyan Eagle. Shu Sanqi and other drill masters were completely shocked by this scene. Their pupils dilated. Everything happened so fast that it was too much for them to take in. They didn't see any first-class pond of spiritual power for several days before. But now, 5 of them appeared one after another, and every one of them was a rare first-class pond of spiritual power. This alone was enough to shock the empire and set off an uproar in the world. Countless practitioners were in an uproar. But it wasn't over yet, because there were still 5 trainees who hadn't made a breakthrough, and among them were Lin Sun, Bai Lingshi, and Li Duxing. According to the current situation, the trainees with first-class pond of spiritual power are destined to break the previous records. Some drill masters exclaimed. Others agreed with him. This was for sure. In the past, there were at most 5 trainees with first-class pond of spiritual power. But now, there are already 5 trainees in the field, and some of the remaining 5 trainees were destined to do the same. So, there was no doubt that they would break the previous records. Chapter 187. As trainees made breakthroughs one after another, they were taken away from the gang-producing lake one after another. By now, only Lin, Bai Li, and the other 3 trainees were still practicing in peace. It was the 7th day since they entered the gang-producing lake. During the past 7 days, Lin had forgotten how much gang chi he had absorbed. He was so immersed in cultivation that he forgot himself. The Nature Insight and Spirit Devour scripture showed great power in his practice. No matter how much gang chi he absorbed, it would be refined and integrated into his spiritual power. It seemed that no matter how much gang chi he absorbed, it would always be refined and integrated into his spiritual power. Not knowing how long it had been, Lin Sun felt a sharp pain spreading from the center of his chest, which made his soul tremble uncontrollably. Not until then did he notice that his heart vessel and 4 acupoints were undergoing some changes at this moment. The heart vessel and 4 acupoints were located in the center of the chest, namely Xuanji, Huagai, Zigung, and Yutong. The 4 spiritual vortexes produced during Lin's practice were generated from these 4 acupoints. These 4 acupoints were located in the heart, forming a straight meridian from top to bottom, which just protected the heart. For ordinary practitioners, the heart vessel and the 4 acupoints were not very important or even common. But for Lin Sun, they had a very special meaning, because the spiritual vein he had been born with was hidden in the heart vessel and the 4 acupoints. Although the spiritual vein of origin had long been dug away, Lin Sun had successfully changed his fate because of the heaven accessing place. The 4 spiritual vortexes in the 4 acupoints of the heart vessel gave Lin Sun extraordinary benefits in cultivation. However, at this moment, the heart vessel and 4 acupoints were undergoing changes. Compared to before, the 4 spiritual energy vortexes had become more violent, and the speed at which they revolved had reached an unprecedented level. That piercing pain came from these 4 vortexes of spiritual power. Lin didn't know whether it was good or bad, and he couldn't even control it, because once he stopped operating, the 4 spiritual vortexes would collapse instantly. He could only try to keep calm and control the speed of practicing the nature insight and spirit devour scripture to ensure that he wouldn't be possessed by the devil. But as time went by, the sharp pain became stronger and stronger, and he felt that his heart was about to be torn apart. Boom! When Lin almost couldn't bear the sharp pain, a horrible vibration force suddenly spread in the heart vessel and 4 acupoints. In an instant, the 4 spiritual energy vortexes that were circulating violently merged with each other, forming a brand new vortex along the heart meridian from top to bottom. This vortex covered the heart vessel and 4 acupoints, Xuanji, Huagai, Zigung, and Yutong. It was like a big abyss, as if it were born there. Its rotation speed was not fast, but it was very stable, and it emitted a terrifying, devouring power. The stellar energy that was constantly circulating around its body was like paper, directly crushed into powder and completely refined. Compared with the power of the 4 spiritual vortexes, the acupoints were bye, and bye-bye. Bye-bye. The chi by the other 4 spiritual vortexes bye, and bye. Bye-bye. A spiritual vortex that seemed capable of devouring everything in its path was perfectly aligned with the 4 meridians of his heart. The most unexpected thing was that after this change took place, it began to cause a series of changes in Lin Sun's body like a fuse. The strength of Lin Sun's body began to rise constantly, and the original Gang Qi was constantly refined and integrated with the spiritual energy in his body. At the same time, his muscles, bones, skin, blood, all of them were constantly being tempered by the quintessence energy. In his sea of consciousness, in the originally dim, starry sky, the originally blurry soul stars were gradually lighting up. The soul star represented the strength of one soul force. In the past, Lin had to spend a lot of time and effort to light up a spiritual star. It had been more than a year since he started practicing meditating magic, and he barely lit up 8 spiritual stars. But at this time, the soul stars in his knowledge were continuously brightening at an astonishing speed. 9, 10, 11, 12, and in the ocean of qi under his abdomen, there was a rhythmic sound like a heartbeat, which sounded like something was being bred inside and was about to break out of the shell. All the signs indicated that it might not take long for Lin to break through the realm. In the camp, the light screen was flashing. Li Duxing is going to break through. Shu Sanqi said in a low voice, his eyes as bright as torches without blinking. The other drill masters were the same. In their sight, the sky above Li Duxing's head was steaming with countless dreamy clouds. The clouds looked soft, but they were sharp and dazzling. Gradually, the clouds began to close and turned into a piece of golden light, which was like a shining black sword that was going to cut through the sky. Shu Sanqi became stiff all over, and his heart beat faster. The other drill masters were also shocked and couldn't keep calm. Sword of Dark Night. This was a kind of pond of spiritual power, which was rare even among the first-class ones, and a kind of God-given talent that had been extinct for thousands of years in the history of the empire. Shu Sanqi and others didn't come to themselves until the vision disappeared. They looked at each other and could see the horror deep in each other's eyes. 1,000 years ago, the legendary sword servant in Heiyao Shrine condensed the pond of spiritual power of Dark Night when he broke through to the gang spirit realm. Didn't he? Some drill masters whispered with complicated emotions. Heiyao Shrine. The sword servant from 1,000 years ago, a legend that spread thousands of years ago, appeared in everyone's mind. They remembered the strange man who helped the founding emperor expand the territory of the empire and cut down enemies with his sword. That strange man, who called himself the sword servant, believed in swordsmanship all his life. The legend about him was still spread in the world, but no one knew that this sword servant came from Heiyao Shrine. I have a hunch that Li Duxing will be chosen by Heiyao Shrine after he leaves the bloodthirsty camp. Someone sighed with emotion. That's for sure, but Shu Sanqi frowned. He had always been afraid of Heiyao Shrine, which was a unique giant in the dark world of the Empire, mysterious, bloody, and cold. Therefore, Shu Sanqi didn't want Li Duxing to have anything to do with Heiyao Shrine. But he also knew that his idea was unrealistic. After Li Duxing left, Heiyao Shrine would be the first to notice him, because the pond of spiritual power owned by Li Duxing was too unique. At this time, another trainee made a breakthrough, which attracted everyone's attention. It was not Lin Sun or Bai Lingshi, but another trainee named Huang Feijia. In addition to Huang Feijia, there were two other trainees who made breakthroughs in the following time. Unfortunately, all three of them only condensed the second-class pond of spiritual power, which made Shu Sanqi and others feel sorry for them. Originally, they thought that the longer they persisted, the more hopeful they would be to condense the first-class pond of spiritual power. But now it seemed that it was not so. At this time, only Lin Sun and Bai Lingshi were left on the gang-producing lake. They were also the ones that the drill masters were most looking forward to. Of course, compared with Lin Sun, they were more optimistic about Bai Lingshi. At this moment, young man was also quite nervous. She focused all her attention on Lin Sun and didn't want to argue with other drill masters. Young Ku's fair and beautiful face was still as tranquil as before, but she paid more attention to Lin Sun at this moment. After all, in Young Ku's view, Lin Sun was a trainee trained by her. After a year of companionship, they had already developed feelings for each other, so she naturally paid more attention to Lin Sun. As for Bai Lingshi, Young Ku had nothing to say. This girl with the talent property of Starshine Eternal was destined to condense the first-class pond of spiritual power. What was unknown was the name of the pond of spiritual power she would condense. To everyone's surprise, after another 2 days, neither Lin Sun nor Bai Lingshi showed any sign of breaking through to the next realm. Just as everyone was getting a little irritated from waiting, Bai Lingshi's body finally started to move. This made everyone refreshed, and they all fixed their eyes on her. Boom! There was a terrible shock over the gang-producing lake, as if the sky was about to collapse. In merely a short moment, Shu Sanqi and the others felt a piercing pain in their eyes, and they were actually unable to see anything. When their vision recovered, they noticed to their shock that numerous dazzling and bright stars had actually floated up into appearance in the sky. There were a myriad of them, and they formed a dense mass. It was like a universe had descended out of thin air. A wisp of shock couldn't help but arise in the hearts of everyone. Stars appearing in broad daylight and illuminating the 9 heavens. How world-shocking was this scene? In the past, they had never heard of anyone condensing a pond of spiritual power when breaking through a realm could produce such a vision. This made Shu Sanqi and others unable to determine what the pond of spiritual power condensed by Bai Lingshi was. But there was no doubt that it must be the first-class pond of spiritual power. However, Shu Sanqi and others had an illusion that the pond of spiritual power condensed by Bai Lingshi seemed to be more powerful than other first-class ponds of spiritual power. Boss, is it a super-class pond of spiritual power? A drill master swallowed hard. His words made everyone's heart beat fiercely, and their faces changed slightly. It was said that above the first-class pond of spiritual power, there was a super-class pond of spiritual power, which was regarded as the most perfect symbol of breaking through in the world. Only those who were born with the fortune of heaven had the opportunity to possess it. However, this legend was so vague that no one had been able to verify its authenticity since ancient times. Impossible. How can such an absurd legend be taken seriously? Many drill masters refuted. Boss, what do you think? Someone asked Shu Sanqi. Many people also looked at him. Shu Sanqi seemed to think of something at this moment. He frowned and fell into silence. Chapter 188. Shu Sanqi's silence surprised the other drill masters. They didn't know what he was thinking about at the moment. Soon, Shu Sanchi revealed the answer. Decades ago, I went to Green Deer School to visit a friend, and he accidentally told me that the founding emperor had a supreme pond of spiritual power, which was called the Four Holy Souls. Around the pond of spiritual power condensed by him, the phantoms of the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise were born. Before he finished, many drill masters couldn't keep calm and exclaimed, if it was true, didn't it mean that there really was a supreme pond of spiritual power in the world? My friend had always been steady. He mentioned it inadvertently because he was drunk. Later, when I wanted to confirm it, he didn't mention it again and said it was just a rumor. Shu Sanchi continued. All the drill masters were surprised and doubtful. Anyway, the pond of spiritual power condensed by Ling Shi must be extraordinary and different from other first-class ponds of spiritual power. We don't need to speculate too much about it. Shu Sanchi's words couldn't dispel the doubts in the drill masters' minds, but they also knew that it was related to Bai Ling Shi's cultivation secrets. If they paid too much attention to it, it would be taboo. Suddenly, young man caught a glimpse of the scene on the light screen. She opened her eyes wide and said incredulously, how could this happen? Shu Sanchi and others looked at the light screen together and found that Bai Ling Shi had already left the gang-producing lake. Only Lin Sun was meditating on the stone platform. But at this time, the water in the gang-producing lake was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the surface of the lake kept sinking. This shocked Shu Sanchi and others. What gathered in the gang-producing lake was the purest gang qi. No one knew how many years it had been accumulating to such a scale. But now, the gang qi it had accumulated was being drained at an alarming rate. How could this happen? In an instant, everyone's face changed. If the gang-producing lake disappeared completely, there would be no need for the bloodthirsty camp to exist in the future. Is it because the abnormal phenomenon caused by Ling Shi's advancement was too shocking that it caused all this? Some people were surprised and doubtful. It's impossible. Have you ever seen such a change when someone was advancing? Someone retorted, could it be related to Lin Sun? When someone raised this doubt, many drill masters couldn't help looking at Lin Sun, but they found that he was still cultivating. His breath was like a calm ocean, and there was nothing special about him. But such a plain performance gave people an unusual feeling at this moment. They felt that Lin Sun shouldn't be like this at the moment. He had been practicing for 9 days, but there was no sign of promotion. Was this normal? But it seemed ridiculous to say that Lin Sun had something to do with the change of gang-producing lake, and no one dared to confirm it. While Shu Sanchi and others were in doubt, the surface of gang-producing lake sank a lot more. No one knew how much original gang qi had been lost. If this were to continue, then the consequences would be too severe. This made the expressions of Shu Sanchi and others become solemn, and they even had no time to pay attention to Lin Sun. Boom! Right at this moment, Lin Sun, who was cultivating, suddenly gave out an earth-shaking roar, which swept across the whole area. Boom! At this moment, the place where gang-producing lake was located seemed to be ravaged by a terrible storm, making everything chaotic. The spiritual projector buzzed, and the light curtain it derived began to tremble violently at this moment. The scene it projected became blurred and distorted, making it impossible to see clearly what was happening in gang-producing lake. Let's go and have a look. Shu Sanchi's figure flashed, and he suddenly left. Obviously, he couldn't hold back his surprise and doubt, and couldn't keep calm anymore. He was eager to find out the truth of all this. The other drill masters also came to their senses and chased after Lin Sun. The changes just now happened so suddenly that they were all a little unprepared. If gang-producing lake really had an unimaginable change, they couldn't bear the responsibility. When Shu Sanchi and others arrived, they were stunned at once. The gang-producing lake seemed to have dried up, leaving only a shallow layer of lake water. Rocks at the bottom of the lake were even exposed in many places. That was the liquid transformed by the gang qi, not the ordinary lake water. More than half of it was lost at once, which made Shu Sanchi and others feel distressed and heartbroken. How could this happen? Many drill masters couldn't help looking at a stone platform on the lake. On the stone platform, Lin Sun climbed up in a somewhat embarrassed manner. His clothes were torn, and his hair was disheveled. It seemed that he had been affected by the roar just now. But he wasn't hurt. Was there any connection between the embarrassed teenager and the gang-producing lake that was about to dry up? No one dared to be sure. The scene just now was too incredible, as if the whole gang-producing lake had exploded, which made people palpitate and feel at a loss. This kind of thing had never happened in the past years. The young man didn't care about this and asked anxiously, "Little bastard, did you make a breakthrough?" Lin Sun nodded, luckily. At this moment, his expression was a little strange, and his eyes were blank, as if he was thinking about something difficult. The young man immediately breathed a sigh of relief and said, "As long as you make a breakthrough, it's all right. Young man, take Lin Sun away first. I have something to ask him later." Shu Sanqi opened his mouth, looking unprecedentedly serious and indisputable. The young man nodded and stared at Lin Sun with her beautiful eyes slightly strange. She said angrily, "What are you waiting for? Don't you hurry up and go with me?" Lin Sun replied as if he had just woken up from a dream. His figure flashed, and he flew to the lakeside. However, as soon as his foot landed, he heard a loud bang. A deep footprint was left on the hard ground, and smoke and dust were flying everywhere. The drill masters twitched their lips and looked at Lin Sun as if he was a monster. Lin Sun himself was a little surprised and embarrassed. "Don't make a fuss. Isn't it normal that you can't control your power when you just reach the human gang realm?" The young man rolled her eyes at those drill masters, grabbed Lin Sun's arm, and turned away. "Normal? The ground is made of adamantine and steel stone, which is the hardest. Ordinary human gang realm practitioners can hardly shake it. Is this normal?" Some drill masters murmured. "Is this boy a human gang realm practitioner? It's normal for a little monster like him." Some drill masters chuckled and didn't take it seriously. Fortunately, the foundation of the gang-producing lake has not been destroyed. As time goes by, it can gradually accumulate gang chi, but it will take a long time to restore the previous scale. At this time, Shu Sanqi had carefully checked the situation of the gang-producing lake. Although he didn't know what caused the roar and explosion just now, he could see that the lake was not destroyed. When other drill masters heard this, they all breathed a sigh of relief. But when they saw the messy situation in the lake, they still felt a little pain in their hearts. Such a heaven-sent land of opportunity seemed to have been squeezed dry of its essence, leaving behind only a pitiful amount of origin energy. This loss was too great. "Boss, what's going on?" Someone couldn't help asking. Shu Sanqi thought for a moment and said, "I'll ask Lin Sun later. Maybe I can get some clues or answers." When he spoke, there was a touch of surprise in his voice. Other drill masters were all surprised. Did all these changes really have something to do with Lin Sun's breakthrough? In a secret room in the camp, Lin Sun changed into a new set of clothes and sat there quietly. However, he still looked a little dazed, as if his soul had left his body. How could this happen? This was the biggest doubt in Lin Sun's mind after his breakthrough. Indeed, he successfully broke through and opened up a pond of spiritual power in his sea of chi. But this pond of spiritual power was too special. It was completely condensed by a huge storm whirlpool. The whirlpool was as pure and translucent as a lake. It kept rotating and spitting out wisps of pure gang chi. A storm whirlpool meant instability. What was more, it was opened up in the sea of chi. If it collapsed, it would tear up the sea of chi in an instant and cause irreparable damage to the body. But Lin Sun didn't worry about this at the moment. After careful observation, he found that the storm whirlpool of spiritual power was extremely stable, like a mountain, although it was rotating all the time. Lin Sun had an illusion that his sea of chi was a bottomless abyss, and his pond of spiritual power was a storm whirlpool under the abyss, with a frightening aura that would devour the whole world. What kind of pond of spiritual power was this? Lin Sun didn't know. What surprised him most was that when he ran the Nature Insight and Spirit Devour scripture, it would cause a stunning change in his body with the pond of spiritual power as the core. At this time, the sound of footsteps woke Lin Sun up from his chaotic thoughts. Shu Sanqi pushed the door open and entered. Glancing at Lin Sun, who was sitting there, Shu Sanqi sat directly opposite to Lin Sun. His eyes were as sharp as a knife, which was rare to see calmness without any deterrent force. He looked at Lin Sun quietly for a moment and said, "You also noticed the accident just now, right?" Lin Sun nodded. "I'm also surprised." Shu Sanqi asked, "Does it have anything to do with you?" Lin Sun was silent for a moment and said with a bitter smile, "I'm not sure. I was in the process of breaking through at that time, so I didn't notice such a drastic change in the gang-producing lake." Shu Sanqi frowned and said after thinking for a moment, "If possible, can you let me check the pond of spiritual power you condensed?" This request was obviously a taboo. After all, the Sea of Qi was the most important base of cultivation for every practitioner. Shu Sanqi obviously knew this, so he spoke calmly and was even prepared to be refused. Unexpectedly, Lin Sun agreed without hesitation and said with a smile, "That's great. I also want to know what's the pond of spiritual power I've formed." Shu Sanqi was in a daze. He took a deep look at Lin Sun and said, "Don't worry. No matter what the result is, I'll keep it a secret for you." Chapter 189. The Eye of the Storm. When Lin Sun walked out of the addendum, the name still lingered in his mind. After more than an hour of careful investigation, Shu Sanqi finally gave such an answer. Lin Sun still remembered the unconcealable doubt between his eyebrows when Shu Sanqi said this. Obviously, Shu Sanqi was not sure whether the result of the investigation was correct. In fact, Lin Sun already had the answer in his heart. He was sure that although the pond of spiritual power he had condensed was similar to the legendary first-grade pond of spiritual power, the Eye of the Storm, it was completely different. Because when he practiced nature insight and spirit devour scripture, not only his pond of spiritual power would produce a terrible rotating force, but also the new spiritual vortex covering the 4 acupoints of his heart vessel would produce a rotating force. 2 completely different vortexes, one above and one below, one rotating clockwise and the other counterclockwise, produced a unique and wonderful change. The gang spirit of the whole body would be constantly refined between the 2 vortexes, like 2 stone millstones crushing grain. The refining power was simply shocking and extremely horrible. This magical effect enabled Lin Sun not only to absorb more power during cultivation, but also to refine the purest gang qi. This was the biggest change brought to Lin Sun after he advanced to the human gang realm and condensed the pond of spiritual power. However, when he was investigated by Shu Sanqi just now, Lin Sun didn't reveal this because it was related to the secret of a piece of spiritual vein that had been dug out that year, which couldn't be known by others. The sunset glow was like fire. It was dusk. After coming out of the addendum, Lin Sun went straight to Camp 39. Having just broken through the human gang realm, Lin Sun's strength had undergone an earth-shaking transformation. He needed to get familiar with this new power as soon as possible. Human gang realm was the first realm of gang spirit realm. Reaching this realm meant that one had really set foot on the road of cultivation, which was completely different from the practitioners of martial realm. If he didn't get familiar with and control this new realm and new power as soon as possible, it would affect his future cultivation. After Lin Sun left, Shu Sanqi sat alone in that addendum for a long time. In the end, he took out a jade booklet refined from special spirit materials and directly flipped to the last blank page. Qi. Using his fingertip as a pen, he carved a line of characters on it like a sharp blade. Lin Sun, 14 years old, owns the first-class pond of spiritual power, Eye of Storm. After writing it, Shu Sanqi frowned and seemed to be a little dissatisfied. He couldn't help but sigh softly. He inexplicably thought of the scene of exploring Lin Sun's ocean of qi just now. At that time, he carefully examined Lin Sun with the power of perception and perceived the unique storm whirlpool in Lin Sun's ocean of qi. However, when Shu Sanqi wanted to explore deeper into the pond of spiritual power, he felt an indescribable palpitation in his heart. It seemed that there was a mysterious power in the depths of the pond of spiritual power that even he was afraid of. This caused Shu Sanqi to be shocked, and after thinking about it for a while, he gave up on investigating further in the end. He knew that this was Lin Sun's secret. Even if this secret might be related to the upheaval of gang-producing lake, there was no need to continue to investigate. What had happened could not be undone. Even if it was proved that everything had something to do with Lin Sun, so what? Lin was sure that his pond of spiritual power was not the eye of the storm, and Shu Sanqi knew it too. But Shu Sanqi didn't intend to reveal all this. There were too many special things about Lin Sun. His attainments in spiritual tattoos alone were enough to shock the world. If others knew that he had a mysterious pond of spiritual power when he was promoted, it would be a disaster for Lin Sun. Shu Sanqi was very clear that once Lin Sun was noticed by the big shots of the Empire, his future would be out of his control. What troubled Shu Sanqi was that even if Lin Sun's pond of spiritual power was rated as the Eye of the Storm, it would still attract many people's attention. Because the Eye of the Storm was also a first-class pond of spiritual power, and it was quite rare. It hadn't appeared for nearly hundreds of years. This brat is truly a freak. Others would wish for nothing more than to possess a peak advantage in order to make themselves stand out from the crowd. Yet, he is filled with peak advantages all over his body, and he even needs me to go to great lengths to conceal it. Who in this world has ever seen such a person? In the end, Shu Sanqi shook his head with a bitter smile and stopped thinking about it. He put away the jade booklet and got up to leave the addendum. This jade booklet was very important. It recorded the final assessment results of the last 30 trainees. It wouldn't be long before it would appear in the hands of the real top figures in the Forbidden City. No matter how reluctant Shu Sanqi was, he had to treat this matter fairly. Because this was the will of the Empire and the bloodthirsty camp, and he couldn't resist it. But Shu Sanqi's description of Lin Sun was very concise. Except for the pond of spiritual power in the Eye of the Storm, there was no other superfluous words. Shu Sanqi only hoped that Lin Sun would understand his painstaking efforts when he really grew up in the future. He just wanted to cultivate a real pillar for the Empire. Outside Camp 39, when Lin Sun returned, he was surprised to find that a graceful white figure had been waiting there for a long time. Bai Lingshi. This beautiful girl was only 13 or 14 years old, but she had already shown a peerless elegance far beyond the world. This kind of person was destined to be a proud daughter of the Empire in the future. She would be as dazzling as the sun in the sky and be the focus of countless people. Although she was only a trainee of the bloodthirsty camp now, her wisdom, beauty, strength, and talent had already surpassed all the trainees and made them admire her wholeheartedly. The setting sun was like fire, and the sunset glow was glistening with a layer of holy and ethereal luster on Bai Lingshi's body. The breeze blew the girl's black hair. Her white and beautiful face was as beautiful and quiet as usual. Her eyes were bright like stars, and she was like a fairy coming out of a painting. She didn't seem to belong to the human world. Like a bloody sunset, the girl in white. In the distance was the golden desert. It was a quiet and breathtaking picture. Lin Sun was slightly stunned and suddenly remembered that before he broke through in the gang-producing lake, he had accepted a challenge from Bai Lingshi. Which class? Bai Lingshi turned around and looked at Lin Sun with her starry eyes. Her words were concise and to the point. She waited here to make sure of a result. The first class. Lin Sun thought for a while and said. Bai Lingshi was silent for a moment and said, I'm not as good as you in practicing, but I'm better than you in the grade of the pond of spiritual power. Lin Sun was shocked. Was there really a pond of spiritual power more powerful than the first class in the world? This time we are neck and neck. I hope we can have a clear winner next time we meet. Bai Lingshi said seriously and then turned around and left. Her clothes fluttered as she walked under the bloody sunset, her body bathed in a layer of illusory luster. Don't tell others about my pond of spiritual power. It was the last time Lin Sun saw Bai Lingshi in the bloodthirsty camp. That night, the unpredictable girl left the bloodthirsty camp. What made Lin Sun frown was that he still didn't understand why Bai Lingshi treated him like this. It was really strange. However, the grade of the pond of spiritual power condensed by Lingshi still surprised Lin Sun. Just take it as you've won. Immediately, Lin Sun smiled, turned around, and walked into the camp. Was it really neck and neck in this challenge? At least Lin Sun thought that the pond of spiritual power he condensed should not be inferior to Bai Lingshir's. The reason why he was surprised was that he finally dared to confirm one thing, that there was indeed a pond of spiritual power more special than the first class in the world. Lin Sun actually didn't care about this kind of challenge. Bai Lingshir had her own way, and Lin Sun had his own way. It was obviously too early to decide the winner on the road of cultivation. Lin Sun was stunned when he entered the camp. He saw a large table of dishes and fruits in the center of the camp, and more than 10 wine jars on the ground. The dishes were very sumptuous and looked delicious. The wine was obviously old and fragrant. At this time, Shi Yu, Ning Ming, and Gong Ming were already sitting at the table. When seeing Lin Sun, Ning Ming stood up and shouted, "Good boy, let us wait for you for so long. No, I have to punish you with 3 bowls of wine first." As he said, Ning Ming carried the wine jar and poured 3 bowls of wine. Lin Sun was stunned. "What are you doing? Drink up first," Shi Yu said with a smile. Hey, drink up, drink up." Gong Ming also laughed. Before Lin Sun reacted, Ning Ming directly put the bowl of wine in his hand and shouted, "Don't talk so much nonsense. Drink up. Let's not go home until we are drunk." Seeing this, Lin Sun knew he had a drink, so he drank 3 bowls of wine in a row. Without asking anything else, he sat down at the table and said with a smile, "You want a drink, right? Come on, I'll accompany you to the end. Whoever uses spiritual power is a coward." Shi Yu and the others were unconvinced by this bold and heroic manner of turning the tables on them, and they started to shout and shout. Then the group of people directly started to drink. When drinking with bosom friends, 1,000 cups were not enough. The 4 teenagers, who were only in their teens, opened up their minds and drank up in the twilight. Bowl after bowl of wine and jar after jar of wine were emptied. It was the first time for Lin Sun to drink like this. In the end, he felt his head was swollen and dizzy, and his eyes were blurred. But in his heart, he was indescribably happy. Later, he vaguely found that Li Duxing was dragged here by Ning Ming from somewhere. Li Duxing was obviously unwilling, but Ning Ming was already drunk and didn't care about that. He forced Li Duxing to stay and kept drinking with Li Duxing. Not long after, Lin saw Li Duxing's body sway, and then he fell asleep on the table with a plop, which made the crowd burst into laughter. The drunken laughter spread in the night. It was noisy, lively, and beautiful. Chapter 190. The next morning, when Lin woke up, he had a terrible headache and felt uncomfortable all over, which was the sequela of drinking too much. Taking a deep breath, he operated his cultivation. The surging gang qi surged, dispelling all the discomfort in his body in an instant. Only then did Lin feel refreshed and refreshed. Then, he unexpectedly found that he had returned to Old Mo's warehouse in a daze. "How dare you compete with others in drinking when you can't hold your liquor?" A young man came over with a cup of tea and handed it to Lin with a contemptuous look. Lin smiled bitterly and drank up the tea. Then he said, "Sister man, did you bring me back last night?" Young man nodded and stared at Lin Sun with her beautiful eyes sparkling. She said, "Although you can't hold your liquor well, you did a good job in breaking through yesterday. Chief Shu told me that you have condensed the first-grade pond of spiritual power, Eye of Storm. You deserve to be my good brother. Well done." She pinched Lin's cheek intimately and smiled proudly, saying, "Do you know that you helped me vent my anger? Those guys who thought you didn't have enough foundation were all shocked, as if they saw a ghost when they knew you had condensed the pond of spiritual power." "Ha ha," Lin Sun said with a wry smile. "Sister man, are you betting with others again?" Young man sighed regretfully. "I wanted to bet, but those guys were all scared out of their wits by the last bet. How dare they bet with me again?" Lin was speechless. Young man suddenly asked, "When are you going to leave?" This question stunned Lin Sun, and then he suddenly remembered that the assessment of Bloodthirsty Camp had ended and all the trainees had broken through the realm. It was time to leave. "What about Shi Yu and Ning Ming?" Lin asked. Early this morning, their families sent people to pick them up. Young man said casually. Lin Sun immediately understood why these guys wanted to compete with him in drinking last night. It turned out that they knew they would leave today. Inexplicably, Lin Sun sighed. He didn't know when they would see each other again. The feeling of parting was really disappointing. Perhaps it was precisely because they didn't want to put on an act when they parted that they directly left without saying goodbye. Yo, you're already sentimental at such a young age? Don't worry, as long as you're both in the Empire, you'll meet again sooner or later. Young man teased. Lin Sun nodded and asked, so it's time for me to leave? Young man said with slight surprise. Why? Are you reluctant to leave? I forgot to tell you that except for you, other trainees in the bloodthirsty camp have already left before this morning. Lin Sun was stunned. He finally realized that it was time to put an end to his one-year life in the bloodthirsty camp. Are you reluctant to part with me? Yes. But for Lin Sun, when he was sure that he was going to leave, he suddenly found that he didn't know where to go in such a big world. Young man seemed to notice something wrong with Lin's mood, so she patted him on the shoulder and said, the bloodthirsty camp is too closed and isolated from the outside world. If you want to make greater achievements in cultivation in the future, you must leave here. Lin Sun smiled bitterly. Sister young man, are you driving me away? Young man looked surprisingly calm at this moment. Her sexy and beautiful face was no longer charming, which added a kind of solemnity to her. She stared at Lin Sun and said, little bastard, you really have to go. You have many secrets and many things that I don't know about. I know that you must have a lot of things to do, so I won't ask you to stay even if I'm reluctant to leave you. These simple words shocked Lin Sun. He stared at young man for a long time and suddenly opened his arms with a smile and took the initiative to hug young man for the first time. Sister young man, remember what I said that night. If you get into trouble in the future, you must tell me. After saying that, Lin Sun turned around and strode out of Old Mo's warehouse. The teenager's back seemed extremely firm and straight at this moment, like a spear that had been thrust out, and he never looked back. Young man stared at him leaving, and her beautiful eyes were covered with a layer of mist. This damned little bastard. The camp was quiet, empty and quiet. There was no longer the hustle and bustle of the past. Walking alone, Lin Sun thought of his purpose of crossing the mountains to come to Xiao Empire. He thought of Master Lu who went missing when the mine prison was destroyed. He thought of summer solstice. He also thought of old Mo who was taken away to protect him. As young man said, there were too many things that Lin Sun couldn't let go. Only by leaving could he really solve these things. Shu Sanchi appeared in front of Lin Sun and handed him a storage ring. This is the ring you brought at that time. The original thing belongs to you. Lin Sun took it and asked, Drill Master Shu, in fact, I came to Bloodthirsty Camp for. Before he could finish his words, Shu Sanchi interrupted him. Someone will personally answer your doubts later. You don't have to tell me anymore. Lin Sun was stunned and confused. Soon, Lin Sun vaguely guessed the answer. A shabby old treasure ship came from the distant sky with a harsh roar, swaying as if it was drunk. The treasure ship was so familiar. It was the shabby treasure ship that sent Lin Sun, Ning Meng, and Sure You Here 1 year ago. Lin Sun still remembered that the driver of the treasure ship was a bearded, middle-aged man named Shu Jin. They are here to pick you up. Shu Sanchi stared at the shabby treasure ship, and a strange expression appeared on his rock-hard, cold face. Boom, the treasure ship shook violently as if it was gasping for breath, and then it landed outside the bloodthirsty camp. A big head stretched out of the treasure ship and shouted, Little guy, hurry up. I don't want to stay in this damn place. The big head was bearded, drowsy eyes, and red face. He showed a tough and bold momentum in his laziness. It was Shu Jin. Lin Sun nodded to Shu Jin and looked at Shu Sanchi, saying, Drill Master Shu, thank you for your care this year. I will bring old Mo back in the future. Shu Sanchi didn't say yes or no. He just took out a simple silver hairpin and handed it to Lin Sun. If you have a chance to enter the Forbidden City in the future, take this to Vulture House when you are in trouble. The owner of that place is my friend. When Lin Sun was about to refuse, he heard Shu Sanchi added, "Young, may also be there. Don't you want to see your drill master again?" Lin Sun didn't hesitate anymore and carefully accepted the hairpin. Shu Sanchi said seriously, "Go ahead. Take care of yourself. Remember, don't forget the words cast in front of the gate of the bloodthirsty camp at any time." Xiao Flower was invincible because of the bloodthirsty, and the empire existed because of the war. Lin Sun silently read it in his heart, and then he bowed to Shu Sanchi with a rare serious attitude and left. Before leaving, he couldn't help looking back into the distance. He saw a young man standing with her arms crossed in front of her chest. Her long wine-red hair was flying in the wind, revealing a sexy and beautiful smiling face. Lin Sun waved his hand hard, smiled, and walked out of the gate of the bloodthirsty camp. "Goodbye, little bastard," young man murmured. Shu Sanchi stood alone, as straight as a spear, and stared at Lin Sun leaving in silence. This was the last trainee to leave the bloodthirsty camp in this session. No one knew whether there would be new trainees in the future. Boom. When Lin Sun just stepped on the treasure ship, Shu Jin, who had been waiting impatiently for a long time, drove the treasure ship straight to the sky like a cannonball. Lin Sun staggered and almost lost his balance. He couldn't help but look a little gloomy. The feeling of loss caused by the departure became bad. Hey, little guy, don't be dissatisfied. There are not many people in the world who are qualified to sit on my treasure ship." Shu Jin laughed and gulped down the wine pot, not caring about Lin Sun's opinion at all. Lin Sun said, "Oh," and turned to walk into the cabin. When he walked in, he couldn't help but feel shocked, and all the distractions disappeared. An old man in a black court suit was sitting there at the moment. His silver hair was combed neatly, and his gentle old face was full of kindness. It was the old man from Heiyao Shrine. A year ago, in Donglin Town, the old man appeared with the mysterious queen of Dark Night and took away Xia Ji with unquestionable will, but sent Lin Sun to the bloodthirsty camp. Now, a year later, the old man appeared in front of him again, which made Lin Sun unable to keep calm. "Sit down," the old man said softly. Lin Sun suppressed all kinds of doubts in his heart and sat opposite to the old man. The old man stared at Lin Sun for a while and then said, "In 1 year, you broke through from the 6th level of martial realm to the human gang realm, won the first place in the quarterly assessment and the first place in the war zone assessment in the bloodthirsty camp, and finally condensed the first grade pond of spiritual power known as the Eye of the Storm." The old man didn't hide his appreciation. "I have to admit that Miss and I both underestimated your potential a year ago. But there may be another possibility. That is, you had another lucky chance during the 1 year you were in the bloodthirsty camp." Lin Sun said, "Senior, you flatter me." He was a little surprised in his heart. It turned out that all his performance in the bloodthirsty camp had been known by the old man in front of him. "I promised that if you could get out of the bloodthirsty camp smoothly, I would tell you something about the little girl." The old man continued, but he suddenly stopped as if he had noticed something, and his eyebrows frowned imperceptibly. Almost at the same time, Shu Jin's rough voice came from the control room. "Oh my God, as soon as we left the bloodthirsty desert, someone came to stop us. It's so damn exciting." Boom, before the voice died away. Lin Sun felt the treasure ship that was flying at full speed suddenly shook and stopped there in an instant. In the air far away from the treasure ship, a black battleship with a length of 300 meters, which was as huge as a sky fortress and overflowed with dazzling spirit light, appeared. Chapter 191. This was a standard mid-level battleship of the Empire, which was famous for its name Weiyang. It was 136 meters long and covered with spiritual tattoo formations. Like a fortress in the sky, it could accommodate 3,000 people. Weiyang battleship was equipped with 72 spiritual tattoo cannons called lava, which were powerful enough to kill a sea spirit realm practitioner in an instant. In the whole empire, only the big shots who really had the power could mobilize such a mid-level battleship. Damn it, I thought there would be another tough battle. I didn't expect that they're the henchmen of the Imperial Guards. Shu Jin seemed to recognize the origin of Weiyang battleship at a glance, and couldn't help cursing bitterly. Lin Sun frowned. The Imperial Guards? They were the elite force of the Forbidden City and the most loyal army of the imperial royal family. Why did such a special force appear here? Why did they intercept them? Boom! Under the control of Shu Jin, the shabby treasure ship landed on the ground. At the same time, Weiyang battleship in the distance also landed slowly. A middle-aged man in military uniform walked out of it and shouted, "Who is Lin Sun? Come out quickly." His voice was like thunder, rumbling. "Oh, it turns out that you're looking for this boy. No wonder you dare to be so arrogant." Shu Jin whistled with a playful look. In the cabin, Lin Sun was stunned. Was he looking for him? Since he is looking for you, you might as well go out and have a look. The old man smiled gently. Lin Sun nodded, opened the cabin door alone, and walked out. "I'm Lin Sun. May I know who is looking for me?" Looking at the middle-aged man in military uniform standing under Weiyang battleship in the distance, Lin Sun felt a little strange. He didn't remember that he had anything to do with the Imperial Guards. "Ha ha, Lin Sun, we meet again." Suddenly, a burst of complacent laughter sounded. A teenager in a splendid robe walked down from Weiyang battleship. The teenager had long and narrow cheeks and slightly pale skin. It was Shin Wenbin. When he just entered the bloodthirsty camp, Shin Wenbin became hostile to Lin Sun. He regarded Lin Sun as his enemy and provoked Lin Sun again and again. But in the end, Shin Wenbin was unfortunately defeated and eliminated in the first monthly assessment. If Lin hadn't seen Shin Wenbin at this moment, he would have almost forgotten him. I was wondering who it was. It turns out to be Child Xin. Child Xin is waiting here. Are you here to see me off? Lin Sun said with a smile. He still remembered that Shin Wenbin's father was said to be a commander-in-chief of the Imperial Army in the Forbidden City. However, he didn't expect that Shin Wenbin could use a Weiyang battleship with his identity, so he didn't react at the first time. "Humph! Stop pretending. You should know the grievances between us. I'm not in the mood to talk nonsense with you." Shin Wenbin snorted coldly and glanced at Lin Sun arrogantly. "So, young Master Xin, you're here for revenge?" Lin Sun raised his eyebrows. "Revenge? Haha, you really think highly of yourself." Shin Wenbin laughed. "I don't need to mobilize the Weiyang battleship to deal with you. Don't flatter yourself." Lin Sun also laughed. "Indeed, the Weiyang battleship is an important weapon of the Empire. It's too grand to deal with me. But if you don't have the Weiyang battleship, I'm afraid you don't dare to stand in front of me alone today." Shin Wenbin's face was a little pale. When he was about to refute, he heard a deep and vigorous voice leave Wenbin. This voice was full of indescribable majesty, which seemed to reach the depths of the soul and make people palpitate. When Lin Sun heard this voice, he suddenly smiled, and his deep black eyes were filled with coldness. He knew this voice. Sure enough, a graceful man in ancient clothes with a high hat and fluttering sleeves soon walked out of the Weiyang battleship. When he opened and closed his eyes, cold light surged, which could take people's souls away. He was like a king who controlled the mountains and rivers and looked down on all directions. With his arrival, the atmosphere of the world suddenly became extremely silent, and even the wind stopped, as if it was afraid. Shin Rudi, when he entered the bloodthirsty camp alone and took old Mo away with a tough attitude, Shu Sanchi could only keep silent. At this time, Lin Sun finally understood that Shin Wenbin might not be qualified to use a Weiyang battleship, but Shin Rudi absolutely could. Looking at the relationship between them, Lin Sun finally realized one thing. It was said that Shin Wenbin's father was a commander-in-chief of the Imperial Army of the Forbidden City. Perhaps this commander-in-chief was Shin Rudi in front of him. The training of the bloodthirsty camp is over. Lin Sun, come with me. Shin Rudi looked at Lin Sun with his frightening cold eyes, which made Lin Sun feel an indescribable, horrible oppression. Lin Sun's face changed slightly. This guy still didn't give up the idea of taking him away. "Is this your idea?" Lin Sun took a deep breath and asked. "This is the will of the Empire," Shin Wenbin said indifferently. "Master Mo has been waiting for you for a long time. He hopes that you can meet him as soon as possible." Lin Sun sneered. "But in my opinion, all this seems to have nothing to do with the will of the Empire, nor is it the will of old Emo at all. It's just the revenge of you and your son. At this time, he had to insist on this point. He could never be taken away by Shin Rudi. Otherwise, according to Drill Master Shu Sanchi, he might completely lose his freedom in this life. How dare you? How dare you slander the will of the Empire? You deserve to die. Shin Wenbin shouted with disdain in his eyes. Shin Rudi smiled and said with a superior and indifferent attitude, "Little guy, a wise man submits to circumstances. You are a smart man. You should know that no one can save you today. Instead of resisting, it's better to follow me obediently." Lin Sun said coldly, "What if I don't agree?" Shin Wenbin said angrily, "Father, this little bastard refuses a toast only to drink a forfeit. Don't talk nonsense with him anymore. Just take him away directly." Obviously, he couldn't wait to teach Lin Sun a lesson. Shin Rudi seemed to be persuaded and walked towards Lin Sun step by step. Every step he took, there was a horrible pressure spreading out, which made the sky and the earth change color. In an instant, Lin Sun's body seemed to be imprisoned, and he couldn't move at all. A smart man will only suffer more pain if he makes mistakes. Young man, although you have reached the human gang realm, you are still as small as an ant in my eyes. I can tell you that no matter who comes here today, it's hard to change the fact that you will be taken away. When he said the last word, Shin Rudi suddenly stopped, and his eyes were full of divine light. He raised his hand and gently grasped at the void. Boom, a terrible palm print as white as jade was condensed with dazzling spiritual light. It crushed the air and shook the void, just like an inescapable net coming down to cover Lin Sun. There was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. But Lin Sun looked surprisingly calm at this moment. He just looked at Shin Rudi in the distance with a faint disdain on his lips. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish between being smart and being stupid. For example, now, if you want to take this little guy away, you should at least ask my opinion. Suddenly, a kind and gentle voice sounded. Almost at the same time, Lin Sun only felt that the pressure on his body suddenly disappeared, and he felt relaxed. And the white palm print in front of him, which was very close to him, suddenly burst in a light rain and disappeared without a trace like vulnerable smoke. Even the terrible pressure between heaven and earth was ended, and peace was restored. When this voice fell, Shin Rudi's face was extremely solemn. He trembled all over as if he had suffered a terrible attack, and his body retreated uncontrollably. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, until he retreated 10 steps. He stabilized his body, but his face had become pale, and the blue veins on his forehead were bulging. Finally, he couldn't help coughing up a mouthful of blood, and it was just a voice that caused all this. It was hard to imagine what kind of terrible cultivation this old man had to have to achieve this step. He was just like a god. Although Lin Sun knew that the old man would definitely not sit by and do nothing, he was still shocked when he saw such a shocking scene. "Father!" Shin Wenbin screamed and rushed forward, but there seemed to be an invisible wall in front of him, which shook him back fiercely. He screamed and staggered to the ground. "Don't come over!" Shin Rudi shouted. His face was unprecedentedly solemn, and there was a trace of indescribable fear between his eyebrows. He looked at the shabby treasure ship behind Lin Sun, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm Shin Rudi, now the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Army in the Forbidden City. May I ask who you are and why you stopped me?" No one answered. No one paid attention to him. This was a kind of direct disregard, as if Shin Rudi was not qualified to talk with him at all. This made Shin Rudi's face extremely pale, and he was extremely afraid. He had already announced his identity, but Lin Sun still dared to ignore him. There was only one situation, that was Shin Rudi's identity was not enough in Lin Sun's eyes at all. The atmosphere was dead silent, and the situation suddenly changed, which made Shin Rudi and his son tremble. At this moment, Lin Sun suddenly stepped forward, came to Shin Wenbin, and slapped him in the face. Shin Wenbin's mouth and nose were bleeding, and he screamed, "What are you doing?" Shin Rudi's face was livid, and his hair stood up in anger. "Don't you see that I'm a fox, assuming the majesty of a tiger to bully others? If I don't take this opportunity to vent my anger, Do I have to wait until later? Lin Sun said with a smile, and then kicked Shin Wenbin hard. Shin Wenbin screamed, curled up on the ground, and twitched like a crazy lamb. Shin Rudy had never seen such a daring young man. How could he beat his son in front of his father? It was so abominable. Do you think I'm shameless? But compared to you and your father, it's nothing. After all, I can't mobilize a Weiyang battleship, and I don't have a strong father to back me up. I can only take this opportunity to act like a tyrant and vent my anger. Lin Sun said with a smile, and kicked Shin Wenbin mercilessly. Blood splashed everywhere, and many bones were broken. Lin Sun kicked Shin Wenbin until he fainted. Shin Rudy was shocked and angry. He was so angry that he almost went crazy. If he hadn't been keenly aware that the horrible breath had been firmly locked on him, he would have slapped Lin Sun directly. It was too much. Chapter 192. Lin Sun finally gave up the idea of beating Shin Wenbin. There was no other way. If he continued to beat Shin Wenbin would die. It was not the time to fall out with Shin Rudy. He turned around and saw Shin Rudy's livid and exasperated face. As the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Army of the Forbidden City, Shin Rudy was a well-known and iron-fisted man with great prestige. However, he never expected that he would meet such a bold young man outside the bloodthirsty desert. Lin Sun knocked out his son in front of him. If this matter was spread to the Forbidden City, Shin Rudy would become a big joke. Shin Rudy almost went mad with hatred, but he didn't show it on his face. He knew that as long as the strong man on the shabby treasure ship was there, he couldn't do anything to the young man in front of him. However, there would always be opportunities in the future. We have to leave. Suddenly, the kind and gentle voice of the old man sounded. Lin Sun sighed in his heart. He knew that beating Shin Wenbin was the limit that the old man could tolerate. If Lin Sun wanted to deal with Shin Rudy, the old man would certainly not keep his acquiescence. If possible, Lin Sun really wanted to completely eradicate Shin Rudy and his son at this moment. Unfortunately, he couldn't do it now. This was the limitation of a fox assuming the majesty of a tiger. He could bully others, but there was a limit. The life and death of his enemies were not decided by him at all. You took old Mo away last time. I will let you send him back in person in the future. Lin Sun took a deep breath and looked at Shin Rudy calmly. Then he turned around and left. Little guy, you admit that you are a fox assuming the majesty of a tiger. I want to know how many days you can live when you have no one to rely on. Seeing Lin Sun's back off, Shin Rudy murmured in his heart with great hatred. Boy, you are still too young. That's not what you should do. As soon as Shu Jin set foot on the shabby treasure ship, he sighed and looked down upon Lin Sun. Lin Sun was stunned. What should I do? A touch of pride appeared on Shu Jin's rough and slightly drunk face, and he said, Watch carefully. As he spoke, the damaged, treasured vessel emanated a rumbling that sounded like the roar of a wild beast under his control, and then it swiftly soared into the sky. Boom! Then, like an arrow that left the bow, it changed its direction and charged towards the Weiyang battleship in the distance in a wild and unrestrained manner. Lin Sun was surprised. Was he going to drive the treasure ship to crash into it? At this moment, Shu Jin was drunk. His face was flushed with madness, and he kept laughing loudly. Rumble. This treasured ship that was obviously extremely shabby was actually like a sharp awl as it fiercely pierced through the incomparably hard surface of the Weiyang battleship and pierced through it. On the Weiyang battleship, there was a shocking hole, a mess on the ground, and a wave of screams and terrified voices. In the cabin, Lin Sun staggered and almost fell down, but all this could not eliminate the shock in his heart. This Shu Jin was too fierce. That was the mid-grade Weiyang battleship of the Empire. Its defense was so strong that even a Sea of Souls realm warrior would find it hard to shake it. However, Shu Jin actually drove a shabby treasured ship and crushed it. Hello guys, see? This is a typical example of bullying others by force. Your little tricks can't relieve my hatred at all. Shu Jin laughed and drank a few mouthfuls of wine with a complacent look. Lin Sun smiled bitterly and could only admit that he was not as good as Shu Jin. Since the Weiyang battleship had a hole, the spiritual tattoo formation on it must have been destroyed. If he wanted to repair it, he was afraid that it would cost a lot of financial and material resources. The most important thing was that this battleship belonged to the Imperial Army. If it was destroyed like this, it would not only offend Shinrudi and his son. Lin Sun thought that he was bold enough, but compared with Shu Jin, he was nothing. Of course, Lin Sun was also very clear that Shu Jin dared to do this not only because he was a fox assuming the majesty of a tiger, but also because he was obviously not worried about the retaliation he would face. This was the crux of the problem. The only thing that surprised Lin Sun was that the shabby treasured ship driven by Shu Jin was not damaged at all after crashing into the Weiyang battleship. Obviously, it was not as simple as it looked. Shinrudi was completely stunned and couldn't believe it. How dared an old treasured ship to damage the Weiyang battleship of the Empire so unscrupulously? Looking at his son who was knocked out, the Weiyang battleship with a hole in it, and the screams and panic coming from the battleship, Shinrudi felt an unprecedented sense of powerlessness in his heart. An unprecedented sense of powerlessness welled up in Shinrudi's heart. Who was the owner of that shabby treasure ship? Why did he dare to act so recklessly? Whoosh, a gust of wind and sand swept over and suddenly turned into Shu Sanchi's figure, which was as thin as a spear. Looking at the shocking scene, he had roughly figured out everything. The original anxiety in his heart faded away and was replaced by a touch of pleasure. Who took Lin Sun away? Shinrudi asked. His voice was deep and low. Do you remember the person I told you last time when you took old Mo away? Shu Sanchi asked in reply. Shinrudi was stunned and suddenly thought of something. His face suddenly changed. Is it the coachman of Heiyao Shrine who has been following the Queen of Dark Night? His heart couldn't help beating violently. Thinking of the kind voice and the terrible power in the voice just now, he felt a little lucky because he was very clear that if the coachman really wanted to deal with him, he would have already become a dead body on the ground. There were many coachmen in the world, but there was only one who could follow the Queen of Dark Night in Heiyao Shrine. It turns out to be him. But how could it be him? Is there any connection between Lin Sun and Heiyao Shrine? Shinrudi murmured and couldn't calm down. I advise you to give up the plan of revenge on Lin Sun. Otherwise, even if Heiyao Shrine doesn't care about it, I won't let it go. Shu Sanchi coldly spat out these words, then turned around and left. Shinrudi's face darkened. You're not here to stop me, are you? Yes. Shu Sanchi's voice came from a distance. He is no longer a trainee of your bloodthirsty camp. Shinrudi shouted sternly. As long as he has the bloodthirsty badge, he will be a trainee of bloodthirsty camp for the rest of his life. Shu Sanchi's figure disappeared completely before his voice died away. Damn it! Shinrudi gritted his teeth, and his face changed constantly. After a long time, he took a deep breath and became resolute again. He carried Shin Wenbin, who had fainted, and walked to Weiyang battleship. Those who were familiar with Shinrudi knew that he would never let it go. In the cabin, it's just a temporary pleasure to assume the majesty of a tiger, but it will bring you a lot of trouble. Why do you do this? The old man looked at Lin Sun kindly, and there was a trace of unfathomable meaning in his pair of unfathomable eyes. I don't think so much. I just want to vent my anger. Lin Sun thought for a while and said, if it weren't for you this time, I would have been taken away by them. In that case, I would have suffered a lot of unpredictable humiliation and torture. In this case, I have to vent my anger in advance. The old man seemed to be a little surprised. After a while, he said thoughtfully, it seems that you have never been afraid of the disasters caused by doing these things. Lin Sun shook his head. I am not an unscrupulous person. I will only do what I think I should do. The old man nodded and said nothing more. He took out a delicate white jade slip and handed it to Lin Sun. This is given to you by the little girl Xia Ji. Lin Sun was shocked. He took a deep breath and turned it over in his hand. Unfortunately, there was only a very simple sentence on the letter. I'm fine, it's just that I'm lonely sometimes. Remember what I said before I come back to find you. You must live. It was just a short paragraph, plain and unremarkable, just like a daily conversation. There was no strong emotion, but it made Lin Sun stunned. In a trance, he seemed to see a little girl in a black trench coat, raising her beautiful and quiet face and looking at him seriously. After a long time, Lin Sun silently put away the white jade slip and put it away carefully, as if he was hiding a treasure. "Don't you doubt that it's fake?" the old man asked. Lin Sun took a deep breath and tried to get rid of the messy thoughts in his mind. He smiled and said, "It's not fake, I know. And you should have guessed it. At least for now, you still can't meet her," the old man said softly. Lin Sun nodded with some difficulty and said, "Okay. Is there anything you want to say?" The old man seemed to feel sorry for him. Lin Sun smiled and said, "I just want to know where you're going to take me now, senior." From a moment he set foot on this shabby treasure ship, Lin Sun knew that the road he was about to embark on was doomed to be out of his control. He hated this feeling, but he had to accept it, because Xie Ji was still in the hands of the old man. Even if she was not kidnapped and never threatened him, Lin Sun still couldn't get over it. To Lin Sun's surprise, the old man gave him an unexpected answer. Mist City, the capital of Southwest Province. The reason why it was unexpected was that in Lin Sun's plan, he had originally planned to go there. When he was in the bloodthirsty camp, Drill Master Young Ku had given him a certificate of passing the county test, which made Lin Sun's first thought when he left was to go to Southwest Province to take part in the province test. After passing the province test, he could go to the Forbidden City to take part in the nation test. If everything went well, he could enter the Green Deer School. Lin Sun believed that as long as he could enter the Green Deer School, he would have enough confidence to find out some valuable things. For example, what was the devouring abyss, the talent property that he was born with, and whether there had been any incidents related to this talent property in the Empire 14 years ago. As long as he could find out, he would be able to find out the truth behind why his spiritual heritage was taken away. Similarly, he could also collect news about Heiyao Shrine and find out the whereabouts of Old Mo. This was the special feature of the Green Deer School. It was the first-class school in the Empire where the most outstanding talents in the world were gathered. There were hidden dragons and crouching tigers. The school had unimaginable resources and power. As long as he entered the Green Deer School, it would be easier to get anything than to explore alone. Chapter 193. What Lin Sun didn't expect was that the place the old man was going to take him to was also Mist City, the capital of Southwest Province. For practitioners in the whole empire, the nation test is the fairest system for selecting talents, whether they are from the upper class or from the poor at the bottom. The old man seemed to see Lin Sun's doubt and explained patiently. Seizing this opportunity, the poor can make a great leap and get rid of the shackles of being born poor. Similarly, the real talents can be selected from the noble children in the test, instead of those ignorant and incompetent playboys who only know how to indulge in debauchery. When you can enter Green Deer School one day, you may have the wisdom and strength to know some truth. Lin Sun felt a chill in his heart. "Senior, what is the truth?" The old man smiled. There was an unfathomable look in his aged eyes. "Whatever truth you want, the truth will be whatever it is." Lin Sun was stunned and lost in thought. He was a little disturbed. Did the old man already know something? Lin Sun suddenly remembered that when he was in Donglin Town, the old man once said that the Queen of Dark Night had gone to the depths of 3,000 mountains to find an old friend. But when they arrived, the place where the old friend lived had already been destroyed, leaving no clues. At that time, Lin Sun suspected that the place they were looking for was the mine prison where he had lived, but he was not sure. Now, after listening to the old man's intriguing words, Lin Sun couldn't help but think that the old man seemed to know something. Lin Sun still couldn't be sure. He couldn't ask because there were too many things involved in the mine prison. Not only Master Lu, but also Lin Sun's life experience and enemies. The old man stopped talking and took out a white handkerchief, gently and carefully wiping a simple black pendant shaped like an ancient sword, but only 3 inches in size. The old man's kind face was full of concentration, solemnity, and seriousness, which attracted Lin Sun's attention unconsciously. Lin Sun didn't know that this sword-shaped black pendant had a name that shocked the world 1,000 years ago, Sigh of the Eternal Night. This was the name of a set of spiritual tattoo armor. Few people knew it for 1,000 years. 3 days later, Mist City. As the capital city of the southwestern province of the empire, Mist City could be said to be prosperous and prosperous, with millions of people gathered. Its scale was huge and densely populated, far more than a border city like Donglin Town. At night, in a remote and old courtyard in Mist City, Lin Sun looked at the clean and brand-new room, feeling that it was like a home. In the evening of the same day, the old man left, leaving the residents prepared for Lin Sun. Without servants or maids, Lin Sun could only clean the small courtyard by himself. This small courtyard was not big, but it was quiet. Lin Sun was very satisfied to have such a free residence in Mist City where every inch of land was expensive. But Lin Sun had to face a practical problem. It was far from enough to have a place to live. The resources he needed for daily cultivation and daily living needed to be solved urgently. After leaving the bloodthirsty camp, no one would provide all these for free. Lin Sun had already counted his belongings: 200 gold coins, a green wave saber, 2 bottles of condensate pills, and some miscellaneous spiritual materials. In addition, there was nothing else. In the past, this wealth might be enough for Lin Sun to maintain the expenses for several months. But for Lin Sun, who had the cultivation of human gang realm, this wealth was simply a drop in the bucket to maintain the needs of cultivation and life. In other words, after arriving in Mist City, Lin Sun would face another extremely practical problem: making money. The province test will start in September. That is to say, I have to live in Mist City for nearly half a year. Lin Sun thought silently in his heart for a moment, and then he stood up, planning to go out and familiarize himself with the environment of Mist City. "Hey boy, wait a minute." Suddenly, a lazy voice came from the corner of the wall. Looking carefully, a burly figure was lying there. He looked rough, his cheeks were red, his eyes were drowsy, and his chest as hard as steel was exposed. He looked like a drunkard. This man was naturally Shu Jin. After sending Lin Sun here, he was also left here. According to the old man, Shu Jin would take care of Lin Sun's daily life before the province test ended. In principle, such an arrangement was naturally excellent, but Lin Sun didn't have any ideas about it now. Shu Jin had been drinking and sleeping since he entered this small courtyard. Not to mention taking care of Lin Sun's daily life. It would be lucky if he didn't cause trouble for Lin Sun. "What's the matter?" Lin Sun asked. "Hey, remember to bring me a jar of wine when you come back. The stronger the better. I remember there's a very famous liquor in Mist City. It seems to be called Burning Soul or something." "Well, it should be this name," Shu Jin muttered for a long time, like a drunkard talking in his sleep. "Well, but take it easy, Jin. Don't run out and make trouble when you're drunk," Lin Sun said with a little helplessness. Last time Shu Jin went crazy, he even dared to hit the prestige battleship of the Empire, which made Lin Sun worry whether this guy would tear down the courtyard once he was drunk. "Don't be a woman. Hurry up. I've been drunk for 30 years, but I've never done anything stupid." Shu Jin shouted impatiently. Lin Sun sighed, shook his head, and walked out of the courtyard. In the night, Mist City was like a city that never sleeps. The lights were bright, like a fire dragon, illuminating half of the night sky. On the spacious streets that were as dense as cobwebs, all kinds of buildings were arranged in a row. Even at night, it was still a lively scene of endless traffic and pedestrians. It was very prosperous. Lin Sun felt a little unaccustomed to returning to the city after a year. Everything in the bloodthirsty camp was dull and calm. Every day, in addition to training, fighting, and bloody battles, there were only cultivation and assessment. But now, walking on this bustling street, watching the pedestrians coming and going, and listening to all kinds of noises in the air, Lin Sun felt that it was a lifetime ago. Soon, Lin Sun shook his head and got rid of the distracting thoughts. He first went to a general store to buy some daily necessities such as rice, oil, salt, and spirit grains and spirit vegetables. Then, he turned around and entered a store that specialized in selling spirit materials to buy some finished spirit ink and spirit materials. Just doing these things alone cost him 20 gold coins. Soon, he spent another 50 imperial gold coins to buy 60 bottles of sapphire gang refining pills. Although they were extremely expensive, They were indispensable for cultivation. After running all over the streets for 7 days, Lin Sun finally bought a jar of soul burning from an unknown tavern. About half of his wealth had been spent, leaving him with only a little more than 100 gold coins. Lin Sun couldn't help but feel a little distressed. He thoroughly realized how high the prices in Mist City were. After doing all this, Lin Sun had come to the center of Mist City unconsciously. There were many towering and gorgeous buildings here, and all kinds of famous chambers of commerce, trading companies, and various entertainment venues such as brothels, taverns, arenas, and so on. Such places were not affordable for ordinary practitioners at all. Just by looking at the clothes of the pedestrians coming and going on the street, Lin Sun knew that all of them were either rich or respectable. Lin Sun was not in the mood to wander around now. When he was about to leave, his eyes were suddenly attracted by a magnificent building in the distance. This building had an antique feel to it. It was hundreds of meters tall and stood there like a towering mountain range. At this time, on the surface of the building, there was a huge light curtain in which a meticulous and beautiful woman with a pretty face was broadcasting the news. According to reliable sources, 3 days ago, there was news from the governor's mansion that Governor Lu Wujuan would serve as the chief examiner in the province test in September. This news caused a great shock. Yesterday, the frontline battlefield in the western border of the empire sent a good report. After a fierce battle for half a month, the Iron Blood Army successfully defeated the 30,000 elite troops of Voodoo Barbarian tribe. This morning, the Academy of Spiritual Implements of the Empire announced that a new generation of small Zing battleship will be launched soon. According to reliable sources, the power of the new generation of Zing battleship will break the previous record and become another war weapon of the Empire. The beautiful woman was dignified and somewhat expressionless. She said calmly, "The following news will be broadcasted about cultivation. Today's most eye-catching news is undoubtedly." Lin Sun raised his head and looked at the light curtain quietly. This light curtain was called spiritual screen. In the final analysis, it was actually a large phantom spiritual formation. Its light effect was very simple, which was to spread news. However, the cost of this spiritual screen was extremely expensive. It was a luxury. It cost tens of thousands of gold coins every day to run it. Even some of the top-tier powers would find it difficult to maintain such a massive expenditure, let alone a normal power. Only the imperial government would be able to maintain the normal operation of a spirit transmission light screen. Lin Sun had heard before that in the capital cities of the 34 provinces of the empire, there was such a spiritual screen, which could communicate with each other and spread the major events happening everywhere in the empire in the first place. At that time, Lin Sun felt it was magical, but when he saw this scene with his own eyes, he was relieved. As a spiritual tattooist, he naturally understood the essential mystery of this spiritual screen. Soon, Lin Sun narrowed his eyes and was attracted by news. It is said that Lian Fei, the son-in-law of Yao Tahai, a great practitioner of Tao Insight Realm in Green Maple County, successfully condensed the second-class pond of spiritual power when he broke through the human gang realm a few days ago. He was praised as another genius in Green Maple County, which caused a great sensation in the local area. According to analysis, Lian Fei will also participate in the province test in September this time. Chapter 194. Yao Tahai was one of the most famous practitioners of Tao Insight Realm in the southwest province of the empire. Only Governor Lu Wujuan could compete with him in status and power. Lian Fei, son of Lian Rufeng, was born in Feiyun Village and later entered Donglin School in Donglin Town to cultivate. Lin Sun was very familiar with them. When Lin Sun was in Donglin Town, he was framed by Lian Fei frequently. Similarly, in the county test, Yao Tahai attacked Lin Sun and Xia Ji violently. If it weren't for the Queen of Dark Night, Lin Sun and Xia Ji would have been killed. Now a year later, Lin Sun couldn't help but feel hatred when he heard the names of Yao Tahai and Lian Fei again in Mist City. How could Lin Sun forget what happened in those years, as well as the suppression, despair, and helplessness he suffered at that time? What surprised Lin Sun was that Lin Fei became Yao Tuahai's son-in-law. But it made sense when he thought about it carefully. Yao Tuahai's sudden attack was probably to stand up for Lin Fei. Humph, a second-class pawn of spiritual power can make him a dazzling genius in Green Maple County? It's ridiculous. Lin Sun sneered in his heart. It wasn't that Lin Sun thought highly of himself, but that he had seen too many outstanding geniuses in the bloodthirsty camp. Compared with them, the second-class pawn of spiritual power that Lin Fei condensed was not so dazzling at all. Of course, in the vast empire, it was normal for Lin Fei to be able to achieve this and be crowned with the title of a young genius. After all, for countless practitioners in the world, the second-class pawn of spiritual power was a great achievement. When this guy comes to participate in the province test, maybe I should find a chance to solve the hatred of those years. Lin Sun was lost in thought. After a while, he was suddenly awakened by a burst of loud cheers. A huge field appeared on the spiritual screen. Tens of thousands of people gathered in it, waving their arms and cheering wildly. In the center of the huge field, under the brilliant spiritual light, a dreamy, slender figure was standing on the high platform, singing. This was an incomparably beautiful young woman. She had a head of light purple hair, a pair of sparkling eyes, and skin that seemed as if it could be broken by a gust of wind. Her exquisite and beautiful face carried a unique cold aura. Countless boys and girls under the high platform raised their hands and shouted a name together. Lu Qingyan, Lu Qingyan, Lu Qingyan. Their voices were like boiling water, and they were neat and uniform. Tens of thousands of people shouted together, and the scene was extremely magnificent and impassioned. Lin Sun was slightly taken aback, and he was almost infected by this enthusiasm. He saw that many passers-by were also looking at the spirit transmission light screen with fervent admiration and love in their eyes, and many young boys and girls were even screaming along. But soon, the light screen changed, and the dignified woman appeared again. She said, since her debut last year, Lu Qingyan has attracted countless fans with her angelic voice, unique temperament as cold as snow, and delicate and beautiful face. Her song Drunken Flower Shade, Parting Dream, became popular throughout the empire in just 1 year and became one of the favorite songs of young practitioners in the world. She's also known as the Soul Singer. According to reliable sources, 3 months later, Lu Qingyan will come to Miss City to congratulate the centennial celebration of Keystone Business. She is very likely to sing on the stage again. At this point, a burst of cheers rang out, which made Lin Sun's ears a little unbearable. He couldn't help but secretly marvel at Lu Qingyan's great charm. Like saber play, sword practice, and medical practice, art practice was a kind of practitioners. Arts cultivators used the zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, and poetry to enter the Tao. It was a rather elegant cultivation method and was rather rare in the world. Because the conditions to become an art practitioner were too harsh. One must not only have the foundation of cultivation, but also be proficient in one of the arts. For example, those who entered the Tao by temperament practiced almost all the cultivation methods related to temperament. Even their fighting method was to kill the enemy with sound waves. Of course, art practice was not used for fighting. The status of art practitioners in the world was extremely noble, and they were often the distinguished guests of the upper class. Lu Qingyan was an art practitioner. She was proficient in temperament and singing, and she was also talented in writing lyrics and music. As soon as she made her debut, she won countless loyal fans in the empire. Lin Sun had never heard of this person before, but judging from the reaction of people nearby, he knew that Lu Qingyan was obviously an extremely famous art practitioner in the empire. Keystone Business is so generous that they can invite Lu Qingyan to sing. I must go to the scene to watch it that day. Yes, me too. Humph, don't be happy too early. I heard that Keystone Business only gave out 3,000 places, which have long been snatched up by the big shots in Miss City. Discussions broke out everywhere. Young boys and girls were eager to fight, looking forward to the day when Lu Qingyan came. Lin Sun was not interested in these, but he was a little surprised by the wealth of Keystone Business. In his opinion, to invite such a famous art practitioner, the cost must be amazing. Without staying any longer, Lin Sun turned away. When he returned to his residence, it was already late at night. Shu Jin was still lying in the corner and sleeping. But when he heard the sound of Lin Sun coming back, he immediately shouted, "Hurry up! The liquor worm in my stomach is rebelling. Hurry up and throw the wine over." Lin Sun didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He took out the jar of soul-burning liquor from the storage ring and threw it over. "Good wine." Shu Jin couldn't wait to drink a few mouthfuls and exclaimed, "It's still the familiar taste. It's so damn strong. By the way, when are you going to sign up?" Lin Sun said casually, "I've inquired about it. The registration for the province test will start half a month later." Shu Jin nodded and fell asleep with the jar in his arms. Lin Sun went into his room, sat at the desk, took out the spiritual ink and ordinary weapons he had bought, took a deep breath, picked up the inscribing pen, and began to refine spiritual weapons. Stars were twinkling outside the window, and the night wind was blowing gently. Except for Shu Jin's snoring sound, it was extraordinarily quiet. In front of the desk, the young man looked focused and meticulous, and the inscribing pen was moving smoothly between his palms and fingers. If he wanted to live in Mist City, he had to make money. And the only way Lin Sun could make money at present was to refine spiritual weapons. This could also be regarded as exerting his specialty. After all, he was already a spiritual tattooist who could refine spiritual tattoo formations. 2 hours later, a snowfall saber on middle grade of human rank was successfully refined. According to the market price of Mist City, a snowfall saber should be worth 300 imperial silver coins. That is, 3 imperial gold coins, excluding the cost. But Lin Sun wouldn't do it according to the market price. His life experience in Donglin Town had made Lin Sun realize that the spiritual weapons he refined were obviously more powerful than those on the market, although they were the same as those on the market. This was what Gu Yinping, the boss of Golden Hall, told Lin Sun, and Lin Sun himself had made a comparison. Lin Sun didn't know the reason, but he had a general guess. Because every time he was about to succeed in refining a spiritual weapon, he could keenly perceive that the gate to heaven in his sea of consciousness would ripple imperceptibly. This made Lin Sun realize that the reason why he could successfully refine spiritual weapons every time without encountering any failure might have something to do with the fluctuation from the gate to heaven. Of course, this was just Lin Sun's speculation. After doing all this, Lin Sun sat cross-legged on the bed, closed his eyes, and practiced meditating magic. After reaching the human gang realm, he had lit up 18 spiritual stars in his sea of consciousness, and his perception could cover everything within a radius of 300 meters. Ordinary human gang realm overmatches could only perceive within a radius of 300 meters at most. This was the unique benefit of practicing meditating magic. Of course, the strengthening of soul power was definitely more than that. There were many other benefits, which I won't go into detail. After practicing meditating magic, Lin Sun didn't delay and continued to run Nature Insight and Spirit Devour Scripture to refine his cultivation. This kind of hard work and rest life was the same as when he was in Donglin Town, except that Shia's Solstice and Shu Jin are not around. Rumble, the pure and translucent Gang Qi, with a touch of gold, circulated along the meridians of Lin Sun's body like a roaring river. In his sea of Qi, the pond of spiritual power rotated like a storm whirlpool, echoing with the spiritual vortexes from the 4 acupoints of the heart vessel up and down, producing a terrible refining force. The Gang Qi passing through his body seemed to be pressed by 2 millstones and refined repeatedly, showing an illusory light gold color. This was the manifestation that the quality of the Gang Qi had reached the extreme. It was terrifyingly pure, which also meant that the power Lin Sun could release was enough to crush most of the human gang realm overmatches in the world. All this was due to the unique pond of spiritual power in Lin Sun's body. It was not the first-class pond of spiritual power, the Eye of Storm, because the Eye of Storm didn't have such a shocking refining force. Lin Sun called it Windstorm Millstone. One by one, Lin Sun swallowed the Sapphire Gang refining pills he just bought tonight. Then they were refined over and over again and completely integrated into his body, constantly refining and consolidating his cultivation. Lin Sun didn't stop practicing until he had swallowed 6 Sapphire Gang refining pills, which had reached the limit that he could bear. Lying on the bed, Lin Sun began to feel the cultivation of martial arts silently. After advancing to the human gang realm, the gang chi in the body could be released to hurt the enemy through the air, which also made a qualitative change in the fighting style of practitioners. Marching boxing, which he had mastered before, was useless. At present, only 6-word saber play and the first move of Tianyuan saber play, reaching for the stars, could come in handy. Of course, there were also the fighting skills he learned from the bloodthirsty camp. But skills were different from fighting methods. If he wanted to exert the greatest power in a real battle, he must have the matching fighting methods. However, Lin Sun needed to master these fighting methods again. After all, he had never really fought since advancing to the human gang realm. Lin Sun was also looking forward to what kind of power he could exert in a battle now that he had the cultivation of human gang realm. P.S. The foreshadowing is almost done, and the show will begin soon. Chapter 195. The next morning, after breakfast, Lin was about to go out with the snowfall saber, but was stopped by Shu Jin. "Boy, are you also a spiritual tattooist?" Lin was stunned and nodded yes. Although he didn't make much noise in his room last night, it was impossible to hide it from Shu Jin. Shu Jin continued to ask, "Oh, so you're going to sell spiritual weapons now?" Lin said, "Isn't it normal? Who will buy you liquor without money?" Shu Jin chuckled and waved his hand. Go, I was just asking casually." Lin Sun felt a little strange and said, "Old Jin, do you have any opinion on me selling spiritual weapons?" Shu Jin said unhurriedly, "Well, I'm just curious how a dignified spiritual tattooist has to go out and sell spiritual weapons to make money. If those guys from the commune of spiritual tattooists know it, they will definitely come to teach you a lesson." Lin was stunned. "What do you mean?" Shu Jin raised his head and drank a mouthful of liquor. He looked at Lin as if he was looking at an idiot and said, "Boy, are you really muddle-headed or your family muddle-headed? Spiritual tattooists are so respected that they will be surrounded by people wherever they go. But look at you. You are just like a humble peddler. You have lost all the face of spiritual tattooists." Lin was surprised. So powerful. Shu Jin said disdainfully, "Only you don't take spiritual tattooists seriously." Lin smiled bitterly. He had never regarded himself as a very special person. But he also knew that the status of spiritual tattooists in this world was extremely high. A real spiritual tattooist would often become the target of competition among the major forces. Even the whole empire, spiritual tattooists were the most unique and transcendent profession. There is only one reason that spiritual tattooists played an important role. Almost all the things involved in the cultivation of practitioners were inseparable from spiritual tattooists. For example, spiritual tattooists could refine spiritual weapons and equipment for practitioners, refine beast tags for beast tamers, arrange spiritual formations for spiritual plants masters, and refine alchemy furnaces for pharmacists. Spiritual tattooists could almost be seen in all aspects of cultivation. However, there were not many spiritual tattooists in the world, and they were even rare. There might not be one spiritual tattooist in every 1,000 practitioners. This also made the status of spiritual tattooists more unique and honorable in the empire. Sure enough, you know nothing. I wonder how you became a spiritual tattooist. Didn't your master tell you how a spiritual tattooist should show his value? Shu Jin sighed. Old Jin, I really don't know. Why don't you give me some advice? Lin asked modestly. Shu Jin snorted and stretched out a finger. A jar of soul-burning wine. Lin Sun nodded quickly. Deal. Shu Jin chuckled. You're quite interesting, kid. Sometimes you're terrifyingly smart, but sometimes you're like an idiot. Next, Shu Jin finally pointed out a clear place for Lin. The commune of spiritual tattooists of the empire. The commune of spiritual tattooists could be regarded as an extremely large alliance of spiritual tattooists in the empire, which could be found in 34 provinces of the empire. As the capital city of Southwest Province, There was also a commune of spiritual tattooists in Misty. When Lin Sun finally found the place after asking all the way, he saw a magnificent and lofty building standing there, as eye-catching as a crane and a flock of chickens. On the top of the building, a line of vigorous and ancient characters. Commune of spiritual tattooists in Misty was reflected by a phantom spiritual formation. Every single word flowed with brilliant colors, and it was dreamlike and illusory. It was like an expanse of gorgeous, multicolored clouds were rising, and it was rather beautiful and dazzling. Seeing this, other practitioners might exclaim and be shocked by the generosity of the commune of spiritual tattooists. But Lin Sun's first reaction was to let out a heartfelt sigh. Rich, really rich, too rich. In order to maintain the illusion of the phantom spiritual formation at all times, it would consume a shocking amount of spirit crystals. However, such a spiritual formation was only used as a signboard. It was more than just rich and overbearing. It was simply inhumane. But the more it was like this, the more Lin Sun looked forward to it. He came here to make money. The richer the commune of spiritual tattooists was, the more profitable it was. Without any hesitation, Lin Sun walked in. "Welcome to the commune of spiritual tattooists, child." As soon as he entered, a beautiful maidservant immediately came over to greet him. Her attitude was neither humble nor arrogant, and she was refined and courteous while a flawless smile hung on the corners of her mouth. "Young master, may I know if you're here to purchase treasures, issue assignments, or sell items?" "I want to walk around first," Lin Sun said casually. Although Lin Sun's clothes were ordinary, he was quite handsome. Although he was only 14 years old, he was tall and straight, with deep black eyes and a sharp face. His whole body was full of an unearthly spirit, which made the beautiful maid dare not neglect him. She nodded with a smile. "Child, feel free to do as you please. If you need anything, I will serve you as soon as possible." With that, she bowed slightly and turned away. Lin Sun appreciated her service attitude very much. The commune of spiritual tattooists was very large and magnificent with carved beams and painted pillars. It was distributed in different areas, such as the spiritual treasure area, the exchange area, the task area, and so on. Although it was in the morning, the commune of spiritual tattooists was crowded with people, most of whom were practitioners. It was quite lively. This was just the area open to the public by the commune of spiritual tattooists. In fact, as an alliance of spiritual tattooists in the empire, the commune of spiritual tattooists was established for only one real purpose: to serve spiritual tattooists. Any spiritual tattooist could enjoy a lot of convenience in the commune as long as he was certified by the commune of spiritual tattooists. But at the same time, every spiritual tattooist needed to make some contribution to the commune of spiritual tattooists while enjoying the convenience. Of course, this kind of contribution was not demanding and even easy. In every commune of spiritual tattooists, there was a task area. Every day, different tasks of spiritual tattoos would be issued. As long as a spiritual tattooist could help to solve them, he could not only get a lot of money, but also corresponding points. The more points a spiritual tattooist had, the more privileges he could enjoy in the commune. Lin Sun wandered around and browsed the first floor for a long time. In the end, he found nothing special here, which was no different from other businesses. As for the second floor, only spiritual tattooists certified by the commune and some distinguished bigwigs could enter it. Lin Sun couldn't enter it yet. Soon, Lin Sun got rid of distracting thoughts and went directly to the certification area on the first floor. The certification area was extremely deserted. When Lin Sun arrived, there was only a middle-aged man in gray sitting there with his eyes closed. Lin Sun didn't know whether he was meditating or asleep. But when Lin Sun arrived, the middle-aged man in gray suddenly opened his eyes and showed a warm smile. But when he saw Lin Sun was just a teenager, he couldn't help being stunned and asked, "Child, this is the certification area for spiritual tattooists." Lin Sun said, "I'm here for certification." The middle-aged man in gray was surprised and asked, "Child, are you a spiritual tattooist?" Lin Sun said with a smile, "My words may not count. You may know after the certification. The middle-aged man in gray was still a little surprised. The teenager in front of him was too young, at most 14 or 15 years old. It was reasonable to say that Lin Sun was a spiritual apprentice, but it was incredible to say that Lin Sun was a spiritual tattooist. Child, how old are you this year? He couldn't help asking. Lin Sun asked in reply, does the certification of a spiritual tattooist need to consider age? The middle-aged man in gray suddenly felt embarrassed and said, Child, don't get me wrong. I'm just a little curious. Saying this, he waved to a maid, thought for a moment, and said, Take this child to the second floor for certification. Coincidentally, this maid was the one who received Lin Sun just now. Hearing the words, she couldn't help being stunned for a moment. Then she reacted and said quickly, Child, please come with me. She took Lin Sun away at once. This teenager seems to have a good temperament. He shouldn't be a liar. But how old is he? How could he reach the level of a spiritual tattooist? Watching Lin Sun leave, the middle-aged man in gray frowned and still felt a little confused. He knew best that it was absolutely not so easy to become a real spiritual tattooist. In terms of cultivation, Human Gang Realm was the lowest standard to measure a spiritual tattooist. Relatively speaking, it was easier to achieve this step. But in terms of spiritual tattoos, it was required to refine a spiritual tattoo formation by himself. This wasn't something that just anyone could do. It was no exaggeration to say that there were countless spiritual tattoo apprentices in the whole empire, but only 1 in 10,000 could refine a spiritual tattoo formation by himself. The cruelest thing was that most spiritual tattoo apprentices in the world couldn't step into the ranks of spiritual tattooists all their lives for various reasons. It could be seen how difficult it was to become a spiritual tattooist. The middle-aged man in gray had received many spiritual tattooists these years, and almost all of them were adult practitioners who had lived for decades, or even hundreds of years. But a teenager like Lin Sun was extremely rare. At least the middle-aged man in gray hadn't seen one these years. Yes, not even one. That was why he was so surprised and stunned when facing Lin Sun. Oh no, this kid isn't a swindler, right? Suddenly, the middle-aged man in gray's face changed, and he felt a little anxious. But after thinking about it, he couldn't help but hesitate. If this boy was a liar, what could he cheat from the commune of spiritual tattooists? After thinking about it, the middle-aged man in gray couldn't calm down because of gains and losses. At the same time, Lin Sun was walking to the second floor accompanied by the beautiful maid. Along the way, the maid couldn't help glancing at him with curiosity and doubt. It seemed that she couldn't believe that such a boy could be a spiritual tattooist. Lin Sun keenly noticed this and couldn't help teasing her with a smile. Girl, you seem to be very interested in me. The beautiful maid blushed and her cheeks flushed. Chapter 196. Interrupted by Lin Sun. The beautiful maid immediately blushed and dared not to let her imagination run wild. Soon, she led Lin Sun to the second floor of the commune. After walking along a long passageway for a short while, they arrived at an antique hall. At this time, an elegant man in a dark green brocade robe with a finely trimmed beard was sitting cross-legged behind a desk. With a tobacco pipe in his left hand and an inscribing pen in his right, the man was leisurely inscribing spiritual tattoos on an indigo animal skin while puffing out smoke. Child, this is Chu Feng, the director of the commune of spiritual tattooists. The maid introduced Chu Feng in a low voice. Lin Sun nodded. In his eyes, Chu Feng was undoubtedly an elegant man who knew how to enjoy himself. His clothes were made of exquisite materials. They looked ordinary, but were full of obscure spiritual tattoos. The ornaments he wore were also of good quality and pleasing to the eye. Even the tobacco pipe in his hand was made of the small rib bones of the earthly dragon beast, glowing with a faint cyan halo. What impressed Lin Sun most was the 2 fine tufts of beard above Chu Feng's lips, which were finely trimmed and raised. Together with his elegant face, they added a sense of elegance. But soon, Lin Sun was attracted by the spiritual tattoos Chu Feng was inscribing. The indigo animal skin on the desk should be tanned from the wings of the blue lightning bird. It was an excellent spiritual material and could be used to refine the upper-grade human rank inner armor. The inscribing pen Chu Feng used had a very unique shape. It was thin and translucent like a sharp awl, and there were drops of crimson patterns that looked like tear stains on it. As he continued to inscribe, wisps of fine and dense spiritual tattoos appeared. His movements were smooth and skillful. At a glance, Lin Sun knew that Chu Feng was a spiritual tattooist who had been immersed in spiritual tattoos for many years and had extraordinary attainments. While Lin Sun was sizing up Chu Feng, the maid had already reported the purpose of her visit to Chu Feng. "My friend, please sit down. Let me finish the wind shadow lightning formation first, and then I'll certify your qualification as a spiritual tattooist." Chu Feng didn't even raise his head and continued inscribing spiritual tattoos. But his voice was gentle and amiable, which made people feel as if they were bathing in the spring breeze. Lin Sun answered and sat on one side. When the maid saw this, she quietly retreated. The antique hall suddenly became quiet, and only the rustling sound of the inscribing pen could be heard. As time went by, Lin Sun gradually became impatient. He couldn't help but look up, only to see Chu Feng frowning and staring at the blue animal skin on the table, as if he had encountered a great problem. At this moment, he was as motionless as a statue. The pipe in his hand had already been extinguished, but he was completely unaware of it. As a spiritual tattooist, Lin Sun naturally knew at a glance that Chu Feng was in deep thought. If he couldn't solve the problem, he could even sit like this for 3 to 5 days. This was not the first time he had encountered such a situation when he was a child, including Master Lu. Lin Sun couldn't help but stand up and stride forward to arrive before the table, and then his gaze descended onto the indigo beast skin. He didn't want to sit here and wait. It was simply a waste of his time. Almost at a glance, Lin Sun recognized that Chu Feng was refining an inner armor. But it was different from the usual ones because it was inscribed with 3 completely different spiritual tattoos, namely Mountain Concentration Spiritual Formation, Vajra Spiritual Formation, and Wind Shadow Lightning Spiritual Formation. The first 2 spiritual formations were both defensive spiritual formations. One was of earth attribute, and the other was of metal attribute. They belonged to the category of elementary spiritual tattoo formations. Only the 3rd spiritual formation was very particular. It took into account both wind and lightning attributes, and its spiritual tattoo pattern was also the most complicated. It belonged to the category of intermediate spiritual tattoo formations. At this moment, the problem Chu Feng encountered was in the 3rd spiritual tattoo formation. It was not because of the refining method, but the lack of a medium between the 3 spiritual tattoo formations, which made it impossible for them to produce harmony and connection with each other. In this case, even if the refining was successful, the power of this inner armor would be much weaker. Lin Sun looked at it carefully for a long time and suddenly said, "If you help me get the qualification of a spiritual tattooist now, I can help you solve this problem." Chu Feng seemed to be unaware of it. Or in other words, at this moment, all his mind was focused on thinking, and he had long forgotten everything around him. Seeing this, Lin Sun immediately sighed in his heart. He suddenly bent down and snatched the inscribing pen from Chu Feng's hand. "Nonsense! What are you doing?" Chu Feng suddenly woke up and scolded Lin Sun. "I'm helping you solve your problem," Lin Sun said casually. Then he sat down on the ground and was about to inscribe on the indigo animal skin with the inscribing pen. "Where are you from, young man? We'll let you in. Get out of here." Chu Feng was so anxious that he scolded Lin Sun again and again. Even in a rage, he still maintained a kind of elegant demeanor and didn't attack Lin Sun immediately. "If you disturb me again, this inner armor will be ruined," Lin Sun said as he began to inscribe. You. Chu Feng was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He wanted to slap Lin Sun away, but he finally restrained himself. It was not that he didn't dare to do so, but the inner armor Lin Sun was inscribing was extremely expensive, and some of the spiritual materials were extremely difficult to find. It took him several years to collect all of them. Once Lin Sun started, The unfinished inner armor would be completely ruined as long as there was any mistake. This was not what Chu Feng wanted to see. But what if he didn't do anything and just watched the boy make trouble? Chu Feng suddenly fell into a dilemma. His elegant face was full of exasperation. Since he became the director of the commune of spiritual tattooists in Mist City, it was the first time for him to meet such a daring teenager. Let me ask you, earth is Kuan, metal is Dui, wind is Sun, and lightning is Zhen. If you want them to resonate with each other, what should be the medium? Lin Sun suddenly asked. He was still inscribing when he spoke. Can. Chu Feng was startled and answered subconsciously. Soon after, he felt a wave of anger in his heart. This little fellow is giving me pointers? How arrogant he was. Yes, Kuan benefits from Can. Dui is born from Can, Sun and can complement each other, and Zhen and can resonate. Since you know this, why don't you inscribe a Can's 4 symbols formation as the medium? Hearing this, Chu Feng answered almost without thinking. That's impossible. This inner armor is based on the skin of the blue lightning bird, which contains the 2 attributes of Can and Zhen. It can accommodate 4 spiritual formations at the same time. Then he became angry again. What was wrong with him today? Why was he led by the nose by this teenager? But the next moment, his mind was attracted by Lin Sun's words. Who said it can't? Although the power of the Can's 4 symbols formation is great, why don't you throw away some of the spirit pattern structures in the formation and leave only the 4 symbols for the circulation of the Can's water? With this, as a medium, the other 3 spirit formations can be compatible. As Lin Sun said, he had inscribed a complete spiritual tattoo formation on the animal skin. At this time, Chu Feng was stunned as if he was struck by lightning. After a long time, his eyes brightened and he clapped his hands. No wonder, that's why. As he spoke, he had completely sobered up. He looked at Lin Sun with a strange expression. Just now, was it the teenager in front of him who was instructing him? How could it be possible? How old was he? How could he do this? Well, the spiritual tattoo formation on this inner armor has been inscribed. But if you want to give full play to its power, you'd better soak it in the Jinkan heavy water for a period of time. Lin Sun dropped the inscribing pen, stood up, and pointed at the indigo animal skin on the table, which was emitting wisps of soft spiritual light, and said, strictly speaking, it was not an animal skin, but an inner armor full of spiritual qi and glowing with illusory colors. Chu Feng stepped forward quickly, picked up the inner armor, and carefully looked at it for a moment. His heart was filled with a touch of shock. This Sun Zhen spiritual armor on middle grade of human rank was successfully refined in this way. It was incredible. Chu Feng felt like he was dreaming. After a long time, he couldn't help looking at Lin Sun and asked, Friend, who are you? There was a touch of reverence in his voice. Lin Sun said with a smile, I've told you before that I'm here to be certified as a spiritual tattooist. Chu Feng was in a daze. After thinking for a while, he patted his forehead and said, I remember, but looking at Lin Sun's excessively young and handsome face, it was hard for him to imagine how such a teenager could be so incredible. Now, the inner armor has been refined. Is it time for me to be certified? Looking at Chu Feng's surprised look, Lin Sun felt helpless. He had enough of being treated as a monster by old Mo. Yes, that's right. Chu Feng nodded, and then took several deep breaths to suppress all kinds of shock and doubts in his heart. Then he said with a smile, But haven't I been certified just now? Lin Sun was stunned when Chu Feng pointed at the Sun Zhen spiritual armor on the table. Lin Sun understood at once and smiled as well. These are the 4 kinds of badges that represent different levels of spiritual tattooists. Chu Feng turned over his hand and took out a jade box, in which there were 4 jade badges of different colors. Each badge was the size of a copper coin and had a simple and classical style. They represent the 4 kinds of qualification certificates of primary, intermediate, senior, and top spiritual tattooist respectively. May I know your current level, my young friend? There was a strong curiosity in Chu Feng's eyes. Primary. After thinking for a while, Lin Sun directly chose the primary spiritual tattooist qualification certificate, which was a bronze jade badge with the logo of the Spiritual Tattooist Guild engraved on the front and blank on the back. Primary? Chu Feng said in surprise. But in my opinion, your method of refining the Sun Jun spiritual armor is already worthy of the intermediate spiritual tattooist badge. Lin Sun had to explain patiently. I just inscribed a simple spiritual tattoo formation with the help of others. It's you who really finished the inner armor. Chu Feng suddenly understood and said with a smile, "It's rare to see a young spiritual tattooist like you. If it's known by others, it will definitely cause a lot of uproar. I understand that you did this to protect yourself." Chapter 197. Be wise and play safe. Lin Sun was in a daze and nodded cheerfully. Yes, that's right. Chu Feng thought of how he made a fool of himself because of the shock just now and couldn't help sighing with emotion. You're right. If other spiritual tattooists know that you have such a high attainment in spiritual tattoos at such a young age, I'm afraid they will also be as embarrassed as me. He cupped his hands and said solemnly, "My young friend, I was presumptuous just now. Please forgive me." Lin Sun smiled and said, "My name is Lin Sun. You can call me Lin Sun." Chu Feng was an extremely gentleman. Lin Sun couldn't help but have a good impression of him since he treated him so politely. He knew clearly that a guy with a strange temper like old Mo would have already driven him away. Next, Chu Feng invited Lin Sun to take a seat. He took out a jade archive and began to record the information about the certification of spiritual tattooist for Lin. This information was a kind of certificate, which meant that from now on, as long as Lin Sun held the bronze badge of primary spiritual tattooist issued by the commune of spiritual tattooists, he could enjoy the same convenience in any commune of spiritual tattooists in the 34 provinces of the empire. Name: Lin Sun. Birthplace: Feiyun Village, Donglin Town. Apprentice: none. Age: 14. What? While asking Lin Sun, Chu Feng recorded on the jade archive. When he learned Lin Sun's age, his wrist trembled and he almost made a mistake. 14? Chu Feng lost his composure again. He looked at Lin Sun with astonishment in his eyes. A 14-year-old spiritual tattooist could hardly be found in the whole empire. It was said that even in the 3 families of spiritual tattoos, there were very few 14-year-old spiritual tattooists. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were as few as the stars in the sky. Nowadays, the most famous one in the empire was Feng Qingyu, the genius girl of Green Deer School, who had the attainment of a spiritual tattooist at the age of 19. It was well known that spiritual tattooist was a profession, but it was also divided into 4 levels: spiritual apprentice, spiritual tattooist, and spiritual tattooist. Each level had different divisions. For example, spiritual tattooists were divided into 4 levels: primary, intermediate, senior, and top. One could imagine how dazzling Feng Qingyu was to be crowned with the title of Spiritual Rune Master at the age of 19. However, compared with Feng Qingyu, Lin Sun, who had the title of Spiritual Tattooist at the age of 14, was not inferior to Feng Qingyu. You know Feng Qingyu, right? Chu Feng asked. Lin Sun nodded. I heard that he is a genius of the Feng clan, one of the 3 big families of spiritual tattoos. His father is the patriarch of the Feng clan, and his master is the dean of the Green Deer School of spiritual tattoos. This was what old Mo had told Lin Sun, who was deeply impressed by the name. Chu Feng sighed emotionally. In my opinion, you're not inferior to Feng Qingyu at all. You might even surpass him. Lin Sun hurriedly said, Senior, you flatter me. Chu Feng took a deep breath and said, Do you know how big a sensation it will cause if I report your matter to the top of the commune of spiritual tattooists? Lin Sun frowned. Without waiting for him to speak, Chu Feng said with a smile, Of course, this is only my personal opinion. A genius like you probably doesn't want to receive too much attention. Lin Sun took a deep breath and said seriously, Senior, can you promise me one thing? Chu Feng seemed to know what Lin Sun was going to say. He couldn't help saying, Do you know that if you can get the attention of the real bigwigs in the commune of spiritual tattooists, you can have a meteoric rise overnight and have unimaginable status and privileges? Lin Sun shook his head. I'm not interested in these things. Chu Feng was surprised. In his opinion, few young people like Lin Sun could resist such temptation. Fame, prestige, wealth, status, he could have anything he wanted. How could a young man refuse such temptation? But Lin Sun refused without thinking. He looked calm and composed. Obviously, it was not a refusal, but a heartfelt thought. Chu Feng said seriously, "Do you really want to do this?" Lin Sun nodded. "I hope you can help me." Chu Feng sighed with emotion. His words were full of undisguised appreciation. "Lin Sun, you're the most extraordinary young spiritual tattooist I have ever seen. I believe your future achievements are bound to be limitless." Lin Sun smiled and said, "So, Senior, you agree?" Chu Feng laughed. "A gentleman should help others achieve their goals. Since you have said so, how can I refuse? I not only promise to keep your secret, but also promise that no one in the commune of spiritual tattooists in Mist City will know all the information about you." Lin Sun stood up and bowed seriously. "Thank you, Senior. Words alone are no guarantee. I'll sign a spiritual tattoo agreement with you right now," Chu Feng said and took out a silver scroll. The scroll was covered with gorgeous and exquisite spiritual tattoos, giving off an obscure and boundless aura. Lin Sun was immediately moved. "Is this the spiritual book of gods and demons?" Chu Feng said, "Yes." Lin Sun couldn't keep calm after getting the confirmation. He once heard from Master Lu that in ancient times, the continuous wars between gods and demons caused great chaos in the world. People were plunged into misery and suffering. In the end, the gods and demons reached an agreement and signed a contract to ensure that they would not invade each other. If they violated the contract, they would be punished by heaven. It seemed as untrustworthy as an oath, but this contract was said to be powered by the power of the heavens. It was the most unfathomable and inviolable contract. It had indeed restrained both the gods and demons, causing both sides to stop the war that had lasted for a long time. Later, according to this contract, spiritual tattooists developed the spiritual book of gods and demons, which was limited by the power of spiritual tattoos. It was so mysterious that people dared not violate the contract easily. Otherwise, they would be in big trouble. Of course, this was just a rumor. Even Master Lu couldn't judge whether it was true or not. But the spiritual book of gods and demons did exist. However, it was extremely rare in the world. Because of the lack of some special spiritual materials, no spiritual tattooist could refine it for hundreds of years. This also made the spiritual book of gods and demons a peerless treasure. One use meant one less. Seeing Chu Feng take out such a precious spiritual book of gods and demons to keep his promise, Lin Sun was a little surprised. "Don't think too much. I'm optimistic about your future achievements. I'm doing this to build a good relationship with you." Chu Feng seemed to see through Lin Sun's mind, so he spoke out his real thoughts frankly. Lin Sun shrugged and said, "To tell you the truth, I wouldn't dare to sign this contract if you didn't treat me with sincerity." Chu Feng laughed. Lin Sun also laughed. Straightforward people talking about straightforward things made both of them feel happy. Immediately, the two signed the spiritual book of gods and demons with their own blood essence. Chi. The moment the contract was completed, the fiend god spirit tome suddenly combusted and turned into nothingness. Lin Sun suddenly felt that there seemed to be a mark in his soul. It must be the power of the spiritual book of gods and demons. Lin Sun even had a feeling that when his soul force was strong enough to a certain extent, it would be enough to erase this trace. Of course, it was just a feeling. After signing the spiritual book of gods and demons, the relationship between Lin Sun and Chu Feng improved imperceptibly. They were no longer as polite as before. Knowing that Lin Sun came to the commune of spiritual tattooists just to make money, Chu Feng couldn't help but feel amused. But he still patiently guided Lin Sun. It was actually very easy to make money in the commune of spiritual tattooists. First of all, in the task area on the first floor, many tasks would be issued every day. As long as one could solve them, he could get different amounts of rewards and accumulate points. At the same time, spiritual tattooists could also put the spiritual weapons they refined in the spiritual treasure area for consignment. There were two ways of consignment. One was to mark the price, and the other was to bid. In addition, there were various other ways to make money. As long as one passed the certification of the commune of spiritual tattooists, he could enjoy such treatment. Lin Sun took out the snowfall saber of human rank he refined. After being appraised by Chu Feng immediately suggested Lin Sun to put it in the spiritual treasure area for auction. Lin Sun agreed without hesitation. After doing all this, he didn't delay any more and left. As soon as Lin Sun left, Chu Feng hurriedly summoned the middle-aged man in gray and the beautiful maid who had received Lin Sun. "Have you all met the young man who came here for the spiritual tattooist certification today?" Chu Feng asked gently. The middle-aged man in gray and the beautiful maid nodded in unison. They were puzzled. Did something bad happen? From today on, don't disclose anything about him to anyone else. Chu Feng's originally gentle expression suddenly became dignified, even with a touch of coldness. "If I find out that any rumors about him are spread, regardless of whether you did it or not, I can tell you bluntly that the consequences are not something you can bear." The middle-aged man in gray and the beautiful maid's faces changed abruptly. They were terrified and swore repeatedly with their lives. Chu Feng's look became gentle again. He knew clearly that the oath was not credible at all. But as the director of the commune of spiritual tattooists, he had the authority and power to keep them from doing anything reckless. After thinking for a while, Chu Feng looked at the beautiful maid and said, "You are young, right? If the young man comes here again in the future, you will be responsible for receiving him personally. From now on, your monthly salary will be tripled. This is your reward." The beautiful maid called Yunk nodded hurriedly. She was both terrified and surprised. She was a little confused. "Jiazhan, you are an old man in the commune. From today on, you will be responsible for everything in the spiritual treasure area. Remember, if you see the young man's spiritual weapon for sale in the future, you are not allowed to mention his identity to anyone." The middle-aged man called Jiazhan was overjoyed and shouted, "Don't worry, director. I will do as you say." The position of the person in charge of the spiritual treasure area was a lucrative one. It was much better than the position of the person in charge of the certification area. "Well, you can go now." Chu Feng waved his hand. Before leaving, Jiazhan couldn't help asking, "Director, may I ask the young man? No. How should I call him?"